What was your big, "oh, my parents are gonna kill me" moment that you had as a kid? I put my cheap gel pens in the microwave when I was 11 because they wouldn't work, and my teacher told me that that's because the ink was frozen. Let's just say I had to work extra that summer so that I could get us a new microwave. First time ever getting drunk, 14 years old. Had a bottle of rum and 4 Mike Hard lemonades all mixed into a big jug. I came home that night, my mum just looked at me, and she knew. She didn't get mad, she just said, "Okay, Corey, let's go to bed, it's all right, let's go." I went to bed, and the next day she made me go into school with a ridiculous hangover. That was my punishment. But she always said to me later in life, "What was the point in me yelling at you? You were drunk, there was nothing I could do." For a month, I kept taking the internet cord from my parents' room and running it to the living room, plugged it into the TV box. I was washing the dishes when my dad started reading out the adult movie titles on the bill that month. Oh bro, I've got you beat. My 14-year-old butt came skipping into the computer room happy as a clam one night to see my father staring at the very raunchy story I'd written about my religion teacher. Yep. I basically yipped in fear and went white, and he looked around at me and promptly lost his freaking mind laughing. I ran away to my room as fast as I could, and I hid in my bed until the next day. I was terrified he was going to tell my mum, and I was so embarrassed. That was in 2009, and he's never mentioned it again. As a 2000s kid, stories like these always fascinate me. We were there, but not actually there. Every single day, my mum told me to be careful near the frozen pond next to our house. One day, enough snow melted in order for my friends and I to play soccer on the field next to the pond. As you can guess, at one point the ball ended up dead center in the middle of the pond on the ice. My child brain figured if I could throw a stick on the ice, it was safe to walk on. So, after making sure the ice was stable by throwing not 1, but 2 sticks, I started my walk to get the ball. It was like a scene from a movie. I reached the center, and the second I picked up the ball and attempted to turn around, I fell straight through the ice and went under. I had to break the ice the entire way back to shore and had my clothes dried at a friend's house a few blocks away. By the time I got there, I thought I was on my deathbed, but I could never tell my mum I was dumb enough to go out there, or she'd probably have killed me. I'm now 32 and have still never told my parents I did that. It's funny how many of us risked actual death to avoid being told, "I told you so," by our parents. But then again, I guess a lot of adults risk death or injury to avoid the same reprimand from their spouses, so maybe not that much has changed. This story takes place in the mid-90s. I was 16, skipping school out messing around in my car with friends. Took a turn too fast and put the car in the ditch. We got the car out of the ditch with the help of a passerby. Not a scratch on it by some frickin' miracle. Got home and my dad asks, "So, how was school?" in a way that told me he knew full well I wasn't at school. If there's one thing my father instilled in me, it's this. No matter how bad you mess up, lying about it will only make it worse. Own up, take your punishment, and don't do it again. So I told him exactly what happened. He couldn't really take the car away. I'd purchased it from him for full trade-in value, out of the money I'd saved from working at a pizza joint. But he found other ways to make my life a living hell for the next few months after that. I came to find out the good Samaritan who'd helped us out of the ditch was a co-worker of my dad who'd recognized the car and had called my dad to let him know about my little adventures. I was 17, drove my girlfriend home from school. We ended up in the shower together. Just as we turned off the water and she was stepping out, we hear her dad open the front door of the house. Of course, my truck is in the driveway, so he knows that I'm there, but he's already walking around and knows I'm nowhere else in the house. My short life flashed before my eyes. He came stomping down the hallway and banged on the bathroom door. My girlfriend, wrapped in a towel, answered the door and lied her butt off. Yeah, Steven's down the street at one of our friends' places. I told him I'd call him when I was out of the shower. Meanwhile, I'm standing frozen and shriveled in the shower behind the curtain, preparing to meet the hereafter. Been together 26 years. When I was 12, we were visiting my mum's family for Christmas and staying at an aunt's house like we usually did. Behind her house was a creek that ran through most of the neighborhood. This particular year, it had been really cold and there was snow at least 6 inches deep in most places. I was playing out in the snow and looked back at the creek and saw some really weird icicles that I wanted to get a closer look at. I crossed a fallen log to get to the opposite side of the creek, facing the back of my aunt's house, and walked along the bank looking at the ice. Basically, the creek was flowing and not frozen, but there was a shelf that had frozen above it. and the ice hanging from it had formed into teardrop shapes instead of the typical spikes I was so used to seeing. As I walked, I neglected to see a patch of ice on the bank in front of me and stepped on it with my full weight. I slipped and slid fully into the creek, which was way deeper than I'd anticipated. I was wearing a winter coat, jeans, and insulated boots, all of which became incredibly heavy when they got wet. I was up to my armpits, trying desperately to stay afloat in the freezing cold water and heavy clothes. My only thought was, my mum is going to be so mad. Obviously, I survived the incident. I pulled myself out, stumbled up the bank to a building that I thought was a YMCA and turned out to actually be a fire station. They called my mum, she came to get me, no harm, no foul, and I wasn't in any trouble, although my entire family still mocks me and asks if I'd like to go for a swim every Christmas. When I was 15, my parents were going out for the night, so this seemed to be the perfect opportunity for my boyfriend and my virgin self to do it. We were in the family room, undressed and getting ready to go upstairs to my room when we heard the garage door open. Two people never moved so fast. We grabbed our clothes and flew upstairs. We sat in my room like, crap, now what? I decided to get dressed and go down to nonchalantly find out what happened. My dad was getting a migraine, so they came home early. My boyfriend was 15 too, so there wasn't a car involved to give us away. He lived in the same development a few blocks away. He'd walked to my house. My parents went to bed, so once we were sure imminent death wasn't upon us, we picked up where we left off. I wouldn't change a thing about that night. It was amazing and special. The sneakiness of it all added another dimension. Unfortunately, my boyfriend had to jump out of my bedroom window to leave. Our dog took a hard no on him leaving the conventional way. But he was able to get onto the portico over the front door and then just jump off that. When I came home to tell them that my girlfriend was pregnant for Thanksgiving of my freshman year of college. So we live in a 2-story colonial. My parents were away on vacation. I'm in the yard and tossing a baseball up in the air and catching it, just a 9-year-old entertaining myself. I think to myself, hey, let's loft it into the first split-level roof and it'll roll off and I'll catch it. On my second toss, crash. I shatter my sister's window. Grandma was babysitting. Grandma reported, I was smoked. I skipped school by leaving the house, climbing on the garage and waiting for my mum to leave. I jumped down to let myself in as she drove off and I set myself up for the day on my PlayStation 1. She then came back as she had forgotten something and I wanted to die in a hole. The yelling was something to behold. I didn't do that again. Getting pulled over by 3 police cars for doing 70 in a 45 zone. My dad happened to call as I was talking with the officers. They asked to speak with him. After a few minutes, they handed the phone back and said, you'd better go home. That's going to be worse than the ticket we were giving you. That was a whole lot of yelling back at my place that night. I don't know about you guys, but it would have to be a pretty massive telling off to be worse than me losing my scarce amount of saved up cash at that age. But then again, I'm looking at this through the lens of an adult. Nobody who's telling me off can legally punish me in any other way than shouting. But yeah, no amount of yelling is going to be worse than a ticket in my book. When I was about 8, my sister, who was 10, and I used to play around the neighborhood with other kids. But we had to be home by 8 p.m. or when the streetlights came on, whichever came first. We had a watch on us, and every evening my mum would make sure that we had one with us and it was working. One evening we were 20 minutes late, and it was the second time that week. If we were late twice in a week, we weren't allowed to go out the rest of the week. My sister and I were talking by the back garden gate, making up excuses why we were late, and making sure we were both on the same page in case she questioned us. We opened the gate to go inside and my mum was standing on the other side of the gate with her arms folded. That was sort of a life flashed before my eyes moment. A friend and I did this upon sneaking back into the house. We thought we'd made it. We slid into the dark house without waking the dog, eased my normally cranky bedroom door open, we both slipped in, latched it quietly, turned on the light and say, "Frick yeah, we did it!" And my mom was sitting on my bed. Oof. Parents heard that my girlfriend was pregnant. She wasn't, by the way. They'd heard it from mutual friends of theirs and my girlfriend's parents. Dad and I had a long and spirited discussion, I can tell you. The story, as it turns out, was as follows. My girlfriend thought she was pregnant, she'd told her parents, they told a friend, the friend told my parents, and my dad told me. I was driving home early in the morning after a night of playing games at a friend's. I was going too fast on an icy road, lost control of my car, and ended up 40 yards into an icy, flooded field. The car filled with water. I was 16 and had gotten my license just a couple of months earlier. Parents were actually pretty cool about it. The car recovered, but it always had a smell after that. There was a small lizard trapped in our garage under a pile of wood, so I moved some of them so it could get out. I must have accidentally knocked over a larger plank in the process, which landed on my dad's car and went straight through the windshield. The lizard was fine though. One time I snuck out of the house, and when I went to sneak back in the door, it was locked. We never locked the doors in my house, so I knew I'd been caught. We lived on a farm, so I just went up to the hayloft to sleep the rest of the night. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A little off topic, but a good story. I one time woke up late for school because my alarm didn't go off. I'm incredibly blind without my contacts and just glanced up at the clock and it was very late. In a furious panic to somehow make it to the bus, I put my contacts in, dunked my hair in water, grabbed my backpack and jacket as I sprinted to the bus stop. It's the time of year where it's dark outside well into the morning, so it was still pitch black. No one was at the bus stop, so I figured I missed it. I still waited for some time in case it showed up. When I realized I was so late it wasn't coming, I walked back to my house, knowing I'd have to wake my mum up to take me to school. Fortunately, when I walked through the front door, she was already up waiting for me. She greeted me with, "Where the hell have you been?" I responded that I was sorry but late for the bus and needed her to take me to school. She glared at me and told me it was something like 4 in the morning. I had somehow misread my alarm clock in my state of panic and tried to explain that I really did think I was late and was really at the bus stop. She just assumed I'd snuck out with friends the night before and was just coming home. Something I had been doing off and on for a while at the time, I admit. So I was grounded for sneaking out when in reality I'd just woken up too early to go to school. My sister locked me out of the house, she was still inside. So I went around banging on all the doors and she was ignoring me. I started pounding on her bedroom window and my hand accidentally goes through the window. About 10 years later and I still have a tiny scar on my hand. 17 years old, had a party while the parents were out of town. I had to work the next day but timed it so I'd have plenty of time to clean before they got home that evening. Came home from work, the sprinklers are on and their car is in the driveway. Driving down my driveway, I was anxiety and fear personified. I walk in the house and my mum tells me, "Your dad had to leave before you got here, otherwise he was afraid of what he might do to you." I thought it was a good idea to play with some candles while having a Lord of the Rings marathon. Turns out that was a bad idea because I ended up getting distracted and set the family couch on fire. I frantically put it out and threw a blanket over it. I didn't leave that couch for a week. There's a certain level of procrastination that's honestly sort of impressive. For instance, lying on a crusty, burned couch with a blanket draped over it and missing out on other elements of your life just to delay a punishment that you're surely going to get regardless. Nonetheless, I'm kind of wowed you got away with it for that long. My mum left 14-year-old me and my 8-year-old brother alone at home to run an errand. I don't remember what he did, but he royally teed me off, and I had a bad temper as a teenager. So I chucked a cordless phone at his face. He started bleeding everywhere and we both panicked. I'd knocked out one of his teeth. So he ran to the bathroom to see which one, bawling the whole time. As it turns out, it was his extra tooth. He was scheduled to have it pulled a few days later. So then the angry tears turned to grateful tears at avoiding a trip to the dentist. We did still have to call my mum though, so that she knew why he was suddenly missing a bonus tooth. He confirmed that he was glad I knocked it out and she went, I have to think about this. Yeah, I was grounded anyway. But this is now one of those stories that we tell because we think it's hilarious. My parents had us each 6 or 7 years apart, so growing up we had a lot of dumb fights. The younger ones still do. It's this particular brother's birthday today, so he's at my house, and he was proud that this was my response to this particular question. His exact thoughts about the story were, after I realized it was the extra tooth, it was frickin' amazing. In our single digits, my older brother locked me out of the house while parents were out. I threw a stick at the back door and shattered the storm door glass. I knew I was going to get a licking, but my bro got the licking instead for locking me out. He was a real jerk to me as a kid, and we're now in our 50s, but he still brings up how guilty he feels for it. That kind of makes up for how much I despised him back then. My parents were away for the weekend. I took my dad's keys and took it for a small drive. I was never allowed to drive unsupervised. I didn't have a license or anything. It was a thrill. I came back, parked, left the keys in the same drawer he left them in, and then Monday arrived. I came back to school and my dad asks me to come look at the car with a death glare. I'd forgot to pull the seat back after adjusting them for my 14-year-old legs. I snuck out and took the car when I was 16 before I had a license to drive at night. I hit a pothole and blew a tire. I rode around on a shredded tire for about 2 or 3 minutes before I drove up on a guy smoking a cigarette in his driveway. He helped me change it. The next morning, my parents woke up early and were going to take the car somewhere, and the spare was still on. Luckily, this was right when the Goodyear or Firestone tires were all blowing out, and I told my parents that it happened earlier in the day before, and that I just didn't have the chance to tell them. This guy was 17 and taking driving lessons. Driving age in Germany is 18, and he'd actually passed his driving test. He would be issued his license when he turned 18. The evening before his 18th birthday, he was having a party with his friends as they were partying past midnight to celebrate his birthday. After they had some drinks, his friends convinced him, "Hey mate, you can drive now, let's go for a drive." He stole his mother's car keys and they piled into the car. They made it 200 meters down the road before he crashed into the wall of a house. He was not issued his license, he was only allowed to get one 5 years later. Getting drunk at the age of 14 at a house party. My mum met me a few minutes walk away. She could hear my ridiculously drunk self the entire walk. The 5 seconds between my mum catching me smoking and actually speaking back when I was 14. I was sitting in my back garden with my best friend and we'd recently acquired an air rifle. So obviously we started shooting it at things in an increasingly destructive manner, because we were 11 years old. We shook up and banged out a can of Coke, and then we laughed as it went nuts, spraying its contents everywhere. Then we got a spray can of deodorant, and it was even more ridiculous because it basically went bang, but in a relatively harmless way. Then we got a can of shoe polish. Turns out, shoe polish is a little bit flammable. A little bit more flammable than you might expect. The explosion set fire to my stepdad's shed. The can itself went straight up like a surface-to-air missile. Armed police arrived shortly afterwards. At the time, I lived in reasonably central London, and this was in 1991, which happened to be slap bang in the middle of the biggest ever spate of IRA attacks on the city, and a couple of months after some IRA members fired mortar shells at the actual frickin' House of Parliament. The bollocking we got from the police was extreme. But it was nothing compared to the look on my mother's eyes the whole time it was going on, because my friend and I knew that when the police left, that things were going to get very bad indeed. The sense of apprehension was even worse than a riot cop carrying a rifle, screaming in our faces about how stupid we were. It was horrifying. We were doomed. And so it came to pass. She went absolutely fricking mental. My mother is a mild-mannered person, but not that day. Not that day. It still terrifies me to think of it almost 30 years later. You probably should have asked the cops if they could have just taken you to prison instead. There's nothing scarier than a mild person who's absolutely livid like that. I was texting my brother asking for help with something so that my mum wouldn't get mad. I called her the B word in the text, and then sent it to my mum. I don't recommend that. I'd just gotten my first ever job at Ace Hardware, and a week in, my buddies hit me up asking if I wanted to head to the beach for the next week. And I was like, yeah, of course. So I told my boss at work a family member had died and I couldn't come in the next week. So my boss called my dad, who also works for the owner of the company, in a different department and starts telling him, "I am so sorry for your loss. Please let me know if I can do anything to help." And my dad was like, "What do you mean? What happened?" And he ended up telling my boss I lied about the entire thing. I still got the week off and went on vacation, but the next few days at my job were nerve-wracking to say the least. I think I was about 4 or 5. There was a rock quarry and gravel pit about a mile from home that my parents didn't want me going to because of a bunch of unseemly youths hanging out there. So of course, this is where my flying experiment took place. I tied 4 kites to my bike and thought if I rode fast enough and then took my bike off the steepest bank of the quarry, the kites would lift me off and I'd glide to the bottom. Probably lucky for me, but the strings of the kite wound into the bike spokes and completely locked it up, throwing me so that I slid all the way down the edge of the gravel pit rather than make a measured jump. I scraped up to my elbows and from my knees down, and all I could think of on that painful walk home, dragging my busted bike full of kites, was how my mum was going to kill me. Suffice to say, when your 5-year-old walks in looking like the finale of Carrie, you don't immediately jump to punishment. Also, my parents are and have always been fantastic and not neglectful. This happened almost 25 years ago in a very nice suburb. It was pretty much the only off-limits zone my parents had for me, which, I mean, moth to the flame, right? I was on my period and got it very heavy for the first time, and was laying back on our new couch in our new house. The couch was pretty expensive, and my parents were really nervous about anyone sitting on it with food or drinks. I got up to go do homework, and I noticed there were about 5 drops of blood stained into the couch. And at that moment, I was done with everything. My parents were actually going to kill me. Plus, I got blood into my favorite sweatpants. They were mad, but they knew I was innocent and they got it fixed. It's perfect now.
What words or phrases do you hear someone say and immediately know you're probably not gonna like that person? Tough love often seems to be used as an excuse to be a jerk. I get it when it's like an intervention, but most times I've personally heard this is just for when people want to start crap. So I personally don't use the term tough love, but I am the doesn't sugarcoat things friend. Granted, I know how to read a room and I'm not heartless, but there are a bunch of people in this world that need a little push or to be told that they are acting a certain way that might not be for the best. I feel like tough love is probably the best phrase, but I don't know another phrase that doesn't seem negative. You're so quiet. No, I'm not quiet or shy, I just don't want to speak to you. We're all family here. In a work setting, mother freaker, you just laid off cousin Bill last week. Yeah, as soon as you start talking to your coworkers like you talk to your brother, you get written up. Can you go get the cart from the back in building C? Get crapped on, poophead. You've got legs. Instant write-up. So much for family. No offense, but just before saying the most offensive thing you've heard in your life. See, also, don't take this the wrong way, with a disaster statement to follow. That's the cousin of, I'm not racist, but proceeds to say the most racist thing you've ever heard. Can't forget stepsister of, not to be political, but you can't retort it because they made it clear that their political rant wasn't political. This family usually calls Twitter home. People don't like me because I tell it like it is. And naturally, they hate when anyone else dares to tell them how it is in kind. Very thin-skinned these blunt folks are. My ex. I wear my heart on my sleeve. Also my ex would quietly simmer about things he secretly had an issue with for months, make snarky remarks out of nowhere, and then it would be like pulling teeth to get him to have a solid conversation about what the freak was even up with him. Turned out to be a shady mofo who would rather burn everything to the ground and start over with a whole new friend group than actually admitting to someone that he was in the wrong. I'm so bipolar. To explain why they are indecisive, or to play off poor life choices, or just to say it to sound quirky. I really hate that because I'm bipolar and I rarely tell anyone. I hate this for, I'm so OCD, too. Yeah, definitely. My colleagues say this all the time and it's really annoying. I actually have OCD and it's a horrible condition that limits your life so much and it gives you so much stress and anxiety. Another one that makes me roll my eyes is, I'm so weird. People seem to like to use those kinds of words to make them seem special or cool. Whatever. I'd like to add in here the phrase, I'm dyslexic. For people that do something by mistake or switch something around that they didn't mean to, that's not dyslexia. You just messed up. Call me when you have to proofread a tweet or text message a million times and the moment you hit send, you notice mistakes. I'm bipolar and I hate it when people use it as a badge of quirkiness. Nobody brags about climbing the walls at 3 a.m. Nobody should aspire to burning their life down. Nobody can throw away every relationship, career, education, and think it's something to be proud of. Because of these people, my own tendencies get blown off and not taken seriously. I'm so glad I found medication that works. I hate the way I used to be. Absolutely hate it. One of my best friends is bipolar. I was roommates with the guy for 3 years. Regular people simply don't know crap about how significant the ups and downs are. And they usually aren't mentally prepared when I start giving examples of the crazy crap I put up with. Some of them immediately question how I put up with him or why I didn't bail. He and I are still besties, and I love telling all those idiot normies that they simply aren't as strong for their friends as they think they are. I'm super happy that you've got a decent medication plan. My friend finally found something that works this past year, and instead of waking up thinking, I want to die, or messaging all of his Discord friends at 5 a.m. to see if anybody is still awake, he just goes to work feeling like a human, and he goes to bed early just because he wants to. But seriously, congrats on finding something that works. I've seen how it changes somebody, so I'll cheer you on too. I do want to say I take a little issue with the comment that said people are idiot normies because they wouldn't stick around for their bipolar friends. I do think people should be commended for supporting their friends in positive ways. That's always great. But I dated a girl that was bipolar and it was ruining my life. And I stuck around for 5 years. In my case, they tried medication, but they didn't like how they felt on it and went back to life without it. So I have to say there is a limit to how much people should have to quote unquote support their friends. It shouldn't come at the cost of your own happiness. I hate drama. I have never heard someone say this unsolicited and not been exhausted with their shenanigans within a day. Those of us who really hate drama feel no need to announce it. We just quietly try to bail out of situations without getting noticed and drug back into it against our will. Someone who describes themselves as an alpha male tells impulsive stories about how tough he is and how many women he's banged. Yeah, me and you are gonna fall out real soon, buddy. And I'm not just saying this because he's an ex, loser ex-BF said this all the time. Then later, when I broke it off and ignored him, his messages were things along the lines of, "You think you're an alpha female? But you're not even close. You can't compete with me and what I bring." Ugh, I hated that guy so much. I didn't believe it until I had a roommate call himself one. And he was serious about it. Considered himself a global nomad, does nothing but look at stocks and crypto every day, only wore tank tops, had a man bun, believed himself to be a natural leader and kept trying to force himself as the leader of the house. Eventually he got into a fight with my roommate because the alpha kept insulting his parents. When I told them to fight, my roommate pushed him. The alpha called the cops because he touched me first. The cops laughed in his face. But it wasn't fun being questioned by the cops at 10 p.m. Dude, can I just say that if a guy constantly talks about how much he hooked up with chicks, they more than likely are not doing that. I used to work with some dudes that were like this, and all of these stories happened when there were no witnesses, and if they ever went out with coworkers, they were often quiet and kept to themselves. Also, the hookup situations always seem like something you could find on Orange and Black YouTube. Where's my hug? Immediately, no. As an empath, that or I'm an old soul. I like people who are spiritual, but these particular people seem to be less spiritual and more full of themselves most of the time. Good vibes only. And I'm such an empath. Okay, I've totally met people that say I'm an old soul or that they like good vibes only. I have never in my life met somebody that has considered themselves an empath. Is that really a thing? Why didn't they just take eagles to Mordor? I feel like this one doesn't get used much outside of nerd circles. Oh, I'm totally compelled to do this totally normal activity because my OCD, ADHD, bipolar is kicking in. This is absolutely not how ADHD works. Everyone seems to have it. It's annoying. I hate that I found out that I have ADHD in a time where everyone thinks that they have ADHD. It is a huge light bulb moment for me. Like, oh crap, this is why my life has always been so hard for me. And I felt like such an outsider / weirdo. But now it's trendy to say that you have ADHD, even though when you really have it, it just sucks. I do find it funny when people think that they have ADHD and they use it as an excuse. When I hear somebody say that, I usually ask, were you diagnosed? And if they say no, I just tell them, you're probably just bad with time management. You'd be surprised how much people could get done if they actually scheduled things out. Those type of people that say, I got this shirt for X amount and these shoes for Y amount. You pay way more than normal people for stuff. That's not something to brag about. Also, do you really have no innate worth that you have to toss around price tags to attract people? To be honest, I throw around amounts sometimes, but in the opposite. Usually to boast about how cheap something was. When someone compliments my jacket, oh my god, it was on clearance for 20 bucks, thanks. Both sides of this coin can be really annoying, but it's harmless if you just do it from time to time. Women who say, I only have guy friends, which is usually followed by something like, women always bring drama, women are usually jerks, women can't handle how real I am, women are always jealous of me. Yeah, it's great to have guy friends, but the problem is when women who view other women as the enemy. Oh my god, I hate this one too. Girl, when you're having problems with all the other women, you're the problem. I have to say 100% yes to this. We've done a red flag video here on the Genius channel before, and I don't think this was brought up, but when women don't have female friends and say the reasoning are some of the above, it's definitely a sign of trouble from my experience. But to be fair, there were a few comments that countered against this idea, and they went like this. I feel like where I was raised in the 80s and 90s, it was common practice to pit girls against girls. I grew up with one other girl as a friend, and she was a huge tomboy like myself. All my other friends were dudes. Okay, fine. They were good people, but as an almost 40-year-old woman, I love and cherish my women friends. and have almost no close male friends anymore. I feel like I was robbed of female friendship as a child due to my parents, and other adults making me think I hated other girls from the get-go. I just want to add, everyone who says that dudes don't like drama are full of crap. Men love drama. If they say most or all of their friends are guys because they grew up with brothers and are more comfortable around guys, or that they can't find any girlfriends that want to do the same activities as them, it's totally understandable. But to say women are too much drama or jealous or can't handle them is just annoying. Sincerely, I'm a girl that has a bunch of guy friends, which is fine, but I like to do typical male activities. But I also wish I had more women friends because sometimes guys just don't get it. And sometimes I just want a girls' night. Just to back up the comment of men liking drama, it's 100% true. I used to work at an old auto factory and gossip spread faster than COVID in that place. The factory was like 80% dudes. My truth. As the way my philosophy professor put it when a girl asked, "I'm just speaking my truth," I could believe the moon is made of blue cheese and say that's my truth, but that doesn't make it true. Get over yourself. I think I would have loved this professor. Reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I believe comes from Ricky Gervais, and it said something along the lines of, "Just because you're offended doesn't make you right." And I feel like that statement is becoming truer and truer by the day. If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. Yeah, this is basically code for saying you're a horrible person. When they start bragging about themselves when you first meet them. You know what your problem is, don't you? Oh, that's such typical star sign behavior. Every horoscope is a Rorschach test. People will see whatever they want to see. I can read every horoscope and find something that applies to me all the time. Horoscopes are stupid. That's such an Aries thing to say. Engagement, initiative, any kind of group speak that sounds like the corporate marketing manager plagiarized. I can't comment on corporate speak, but people that use big words just to sound more intelligent, we get it, Brad, you can read a dictionary. I'm an influencer and I have X amount of followers. I will say this statement is worse when they're just starting out. Yeah, I just started, but I know what it takes to become famous, so in a few months, these numbers are gonna be insane. Just watch. My ex was a narcissist. I didn't hear this nearly as often until the last year or so. Now suddenly everyone has an ex that's a narcissist. I work in the behavioral health field, and this one drives me crazy. No, just because you both wanted different things in life doesn't make him selfish enough to be labeled with an actual personality disorder. Oh my God. Just say you weren't compatible and move on with your life. No offense to those who actually genuinely dated a narcissist. People can just be genuinely sucky, awful, self-absorbed, and even abusive, but still not be a narcissist. People don't have to have a personality disorder to suck. That last sentence is vastly underrated. Anyone older who says, "Back in my day, you young people don't know what hard work is." Anything like that, as if they couldn't buy a house on minimum wage and go to college without crippling debt. I personally graduated debt-free thanks to scholarships, but the older generation seems to not understand the wage/cost disparity between their generation and the younger generations. As I'm older now, I understand that everyone will end up saying, "Back in my day," or "the younger generation," because it's the best way to describe something in comparison. It isn't always negative, and a lot of statements are truthful, such as, "Back in my day, people didn't come out as gay in high school because they feared what people might think or say." Or, "The younger generation will never understand the amount of effort that went into a research paper before the internet." Yes, but you know others have it worse. Every time you have an issue, denying the pain of someone isn't helping them at all. Yes, others have it worse. But at day D, hour H, I want to talk about my feelings and feel heard and seen. I want solutions, or I want help, or I want someone to complain about said subject or sensitive topic for me. It's not being selfish, it's just de-stressing. And if you can't find a solution, at least keep the bad vibes away. I had this new coworker who I didn't have to work with, but could have made both of our jobs easier. He didn't even need to say anything. At the first morning meeting, he had a Daily Wire coffee mug that said, "This cup is filled with liberal tears." Yeah, no thanks, dude. I don't need your help with anything. Anything involving crystal healing, essential oils doing more than just smelling nice, or projecting one's dreams into reality. I forget the exact term for the third thing at this moment. If any one of these things comes up in conversation and you're being serious about it, I automatically don't trust you completely. If multiple are a part of your personality, I don't trust you at all. Is the third thing speaking stuff into existence? Is that what they meant? Anyone that badmouths others. My initial thought immediately jumps to, what are you gonna say about me when I'm not around? Everything happens for a reason. Nah, that's some bullcrap platitude that you tell yourself because thinking the world operates on logic and reason is a coping mechanism for avoiding the reality that the world is unfair, unpredictable, and bad things happen to good people all the time. People who will insert, well, if Trump was still in office, in every single conversation despite having nothing to do with politics. Oh, I just thought of another one. People who say, well, just wait until some blue-haired person comes by and complains about what we're doing, when they are trying to defend something that they do or are into. Most of the time, it's projection, and it doesn't even make sense with the particular subject matter. Men are logical and analytical, and women are emotional. That's one of the most inaccurate statements I keep hearing every time I listen to a certain type of people on certain videos or podcasts. Anyone using words like literally, toxic, or problematic in every other sentence, it's like these words have lost all meaning. Regardless, or it is what it is. Guilty of it is what it is. I'm not saying I don't care. To be fair, sometimes I don't care. But more that you need to keep perspective in what you have control over in your life and what you don't. I have a few coworkers that are habitual complainers, to the point that I believe it may just be their natural state. Why the freak are you complaining to me because Taco Bell was out of Baja Blast 8 hours ago, before you came to work and now your day's ruined? They didn't have it. Get something else. It is what it is. It boggles my mind people can function in their day-to-day life by personalizing every externality and bringing themselves to near cathartic rage about them. Any talk of Biden crime family, Hunter laptop, CRT, they put litter boxes in schools for kids that identify as cats, them teachers are indoctrinating kids, mentions of Newsmax, OAN, or Tucker freaking Carlson, or blaming Democrats for every poor choice they made in life. I'm not racist, but went on a date with a random woman from Bumble, and no more than 5 minutes into the convo, she started a sentence with this, then spewed something incredibly racist. There is no way to end that sentence and not have it be awful. Paid the bills for the drinks and apps that hadn't even arrived yet and made a beeline to the door to nope my way out of there. If she bleeds, she breeds. Don't forget, oh look, now you're breedable too. Well, the Bible says, followed by some incredibly arrogant thoughts. Anyone who says, I have haters, or any variant of that. Anything derogatory regarding or referencing a group you're not a part of tells me all I need to know about what you think of yourself and others. Work hard, play hard. As a straight, white, cisgender person, ma'am, this is a Wendy's? Thoughts and prayers. Tells me they put on an empathic face while doing absolutely nothing to help, regardless of their ability to do so. Virtue signaling at its finest. Anything MAGA, using the term woke to describe people they don't like, and preaching/missioning about any religion, and I'm out. I'm sure you're a fine person, but I only have 20 to 30 years of my life. I don't want to spend it conversing with idiots and self-righteous voices that believe in that. I'm not sure what happened here, but there was a huge pocket of things that were intertwinable and relatable all in that little section. The one thing I will say though is if woke is part of your everyday vocabulary, yeah, my brain is probably gonna turn off when talking to you. You'd be prettier if you just smiled. Relax, bro, it's just a joke. After saying something incredibly inappropriate or offensive. Specifically, anyone who refers to COVID as the Rona. I hate you. I'm a real patriot. Most people who use this phrase never served their country in any capacity to make it better. That means not necessarily military, but other jobs that help the country as well. And they think for some reason because they are extremely right-leaning, probably love the orange one and have lots of guns, it makes them a patriot. I served in the military, then when I got out, I tried to keep jobs that help my community/country in some way. And I feel like a true patriot is not a person looking for violence or to hate others, but a person who wants us to all succeed, even people who are immigrants that may not be an official citizen yet, and for us all to work together as a country to improve the lives of everyone that lives here. To me, that's a true patriot. I got one that I didn't see on the list. When gamers say, People nowadays would never survive in the old Call of Duty lobbies. People that say this are usually some of the softest people in the world. Just look at any big YouTuber or Twitch streamer that plays COD religiously.
People who quit a job in the heat of the moment, what chaos did you leave them to handle? I didn't get a bonus because they felt the overtime I did paid me more than the bonus they gave to everyone else. I didn't know what to say after that, so after a few hours, I offered to get coffee for everyone. I left and never came back or contacted them again. I keep thinking that I should go back with coffee now that I've been gone for 10 years and just act normal. When I was a programmer at an insurance company, one of the longtime programmers had been with the company for nearly 20 years. This guy originally wrote most of the financial system himself, from scratch, and had maintained it with the help of a couple other people. Every month he did the month-end processing, and every quarter he did the quarter-end processing. Every year-end, yep, it was him. There was a change in management a couple of times, and he kept getting treated worse and worse. He was being treated unfairly, asked to do unreasonably more work than he was already doing, getting thrown under the bus, that kind of thing. He finally had enough, and one morning he came in, walked to the manager's office and quit, then walked out the door. In the aftermath, it took a team of 4 other people months and months to get things back together and to a point where things were serviceable. I got stabbed in the shoulder while working as a bookmaker, or betting shop manager. I was the only key holder, and while the paramedics were tending to me, the area manager was on the phone asking me to open the store the next day. I closed shop for the day, came back once I got out of the hospital, put my keys in the safe, and left my notice on the desk. The store didn't open for 3 days while they sorted a field manager. I worked for a landscape company doing new installs. Our owner was cheap with a bad habit of constantly biting off more than he could chew. One year, he asked if we wanted any part of a school project in a city we didn't live in, over 2 hours away, and we said no. He said that was fine and would just bid on one school for his crew who lived in that area. Instead, he bid on multiple schools and got 3 of them. Obviously, none of us are happy about this, and he claimed that he'd put us up in hotels so we wouldn't have to commute. He never did. The work itself sucked, way more than a crew our size could handle, and the owner's brother did absolutely nothing. He was supposed to be the project manager / supervisor, but literally all he did was play Clash of Clans on his phone and yell at people about not being fast enough. After a few days, I was done. I'd grown sick of the job anyway, but this project really sealed the deal. Having to commute 4+ hours a day and then physically destroy myself was taking a toll fast. I woke up Friday morning, called the owner, told him I quit and to stop taking more work than he can manage. He blew up, but I just hung up the phone and went back to sleep. 2 weeks later, I get a call from him. He's begging me to come back because after I quit, 2 other guys did too. The project is now woefully behind schedule and he's going to get fined if things don't pick up and get finished. I told him he should have thought of that before he bit off more than he could chew and expected a small crew to do it all in a short time frame. He got quiet and then asked if a 50-cent raise would get me back. No, that was the last time I ever heard from him, and I can't find his company website anymore. I was an 18-year-old assistant manager at a big pizza franchise. I'd been working open to close for 2 weeks straight because the new GM went on vacation right after taking over the store. When she got back from her vacation, she only worked a half day. I opened and still closed. Then she changed the schedule and took 2 days off. This was the last straw on top of a ton of other crap piled over a year. Multiple new GMs, crappy district manager, awful store politics. I was alone during an unusually large lunch rush and was just done with everyone's crap. I had a make line full of orders, phones ringing, oven full of pizza, orders to be picked up, and a massive bunch of dough sitting on the prep table. I said screw it. I shut the oven off, walked out, and locked the door. Didn't call anyone to let them know. It would be hours before the evening driver would roll in. No prep for the day, no dough for the day, except for the blob I'm sure would become a massive mess after rising for hours. A double-deck oven with both belts full of pies wasted, and what was probably shaping to be a $1,200 lunch out the window. I hope she was well rested after her time off. Shoppers Drug Mart. I had simply asked for better hours after working ridiculous late night hours for over a year. Instead, they hired a new guy and gave him the exact hours I asked for and then had me train him. So when training wasn't going very well because the new guy was super slow, They blamed me for it. Now, I had a good standing with everyone at this store, but I didn't need shoppers, and I let a lot of crap slide every day. So again, when I asked for vacation that I deserved because I was never sick and punctual as heck, I was denied it. And the next day, the manager had 4 weeks of vacation set. So to make it up to me, they offered me all these insane overtime shifts for the next 3 weeks. So I waited for the frozen deliveries to arrive that same day. The boss was packing up to go home, and when he said goodnight to me, I said, "But who's gonna do this frozen delivery?" He laughed and said, "You are." So I replied, "Nope." And he became super cross, so I started laughing. "What are you laughing about?" he says. So I said, "Screw you, I quit." Now there was no one to finish the night shift. He immediately asks for the uniform. I said, "No, screw you, I quit." I had never done that before or since. Uniform went in the trash. I always worked the close shift at a fast food joint. My managers loved to hand out citations for any little thing. The policy was 3 strikes and you're out. I had 2 strikes and was told to clean up the entire front end and bathroom in an hour or risk getting a 3rd strike. To put things in perspective, I had to close the register, count the money, clean up the front end, restock everything, sweep and mop the floors, and clean the entire bathroom, including the toilets, for basically $8.05. I walked into the bathroom just to see what to expect. It looked like someone had finished projectile pooping all over the toilet and then decided to pee next to the sink. I knew I wouldn't be able to do everything in an hour and that I would get fired regardless. So I took my uniform off and walked home shirtless. I worked as an engineer at the mill and was responsible for operation and process adjustment of certain pieces of equipment. I was able to make it work better than specified results, but my managers required more production, less power, etc. So at this point, the machines reached its capacity, and further pushing it was risky and a huge amount of investment was needed. I was told by the higher-ups that, "You didn't even try to do it, only said some lame excuses." I was done with this and called to the manufacturer of this equipment. Long story short, instead of instructions and advice, they sent me a job offer for local service rep. After I quit the mill, my ex-colleagues tried to push the machine above the limits and successfully broke it and stopped the production for a couple of weeks. I worked as a small engine repair tech for a larger company. I'm also in the National Guard. I had gotten hurt and needed physical therapy, and 1 or 2 days a month I would have to miss because of an extended drill weekend. Well, my boss didn't like that, and she decided that she would punish me by making me stay later than everyone else. She was punishing me for going to physical therapy for a workplace injury and for being a soldier. Now, you may be thinking, having to stay late to keep up on your work doesn't sound like that much of a punishment. Normally, you would be right, but trust me, she was doing a lot more to make sure it was a punishment. Well, one day after being told I was not given approval for the 1 day of vacation I had asked for 3 months in advance to go see the eclipse and generally being treated like a slave, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And clocked out at the end of my shift. That next Monday after drill weekend, I showed up, packed up all my tools, and took off. My boss started freaking out when she saw what I was doing. I left and found out that me leaving cost her over $100,000 because she had to ship my workload to another state to get another shop to work on them. That meant she needed to pay to ship them and then pay to ship them back. And since her shop didn't do any of the actual work, she never saw any money for any of the repairs. It was like 80 riding lawnmowers. I had a job as a fairly niche field service engineer in IT. Started off covering my local area, which was fine. Maybe an hour traveling time to my most remote site tops. Then they lost an engineer in my adjacent territory, and I had to cover that too. This put my travel time up to about 2.5 hours each way. That wasn't great, but it was temporary, allegedly. Then they lost another engineer, and guess what? I had to cover that area too. That meant I was having to do up to 4 hours driving each way just to get to a site. And then they expected me to put in a full 8-hour day. I mentioned this to my manager and pointed out that if I was pulling multi-day jobs at a site 4 hours away, it would be far better for them to put me up in a hotel. But they said, nah, as it was unusual for me to do multi-day installs. Anyway, a month or so later, I was expected to put in a complete new system at a site, spec'd up to 4 full days to do it. High-profile client, and I basically told my manager I needed a hotel. They pushed back. It's only 4 days, you'll be fine. Just charge them the travel time as worked hours. Which is fine, but I was salaried, and they were the ones invoicing the client, so no overtime for me. Anyway, on the second day, I arrived at nearly lunchtime after a massive accident on the motorway held me up for 4 hours, and was greeted by the client chewing me out. I thought, screw this, packed my tools, left the site with their old system ripped out, and a pile of unopened boxes of new kit, switched off my mobile and drove to the head office. I parked close enough to the main entrance that the car operated the automatic doors, went into reception and told the receptionist, very politely, it wasn't her fault, that I quit. All my gear was in the car and here are my keys, phone, and pass. Then walked out and got a cab home. I found out from a friend that they lost that client, which was one of their main ones, even after my manager basically spent the rest of the week installing the kit on his own without any documentation, since I'd written the spec and accidentally kept it. I spent some time working at a gas station where my supervisor would take about 20 smoke breaks a day while demanding that the rest of us work harder. After several days of this and my boss not doing anything about it, I quit in the middle of a pizza order rush. Oh boy, let me tell you about my last day of Walmart. It's Monday morning, my day off, and I was pulling out of my doctor's office after getting blood work done when I receive a call from my manager. Let's just call her Demon Queen. Demon Queen asks me to come into work because of 2 call-offs. Thinking that I didn't have anything else planned and could use the overtime, I agreed. I informed her over the phone it would take me an hour to get home, dress, and drive to work. All I heard from her was an annoyed, "Fine, just get here." 1 hour later, I arrived at work. Just as I was getting to the deli where I work, my manager, who was behind the counter by herself, starts yelling at me for being late, in front of not 1, not 2, but a line of customers. I attempt to remind her of our conversation, but she cuts me off, tosses her apron, and storms out of the deli. I'm forced to shrug it off, apologize to the customers, and get to work. Later, I have a customer walk to the deli and ask about our rotisserie chicken, something not uncommon. I explain it'll be over an hour before they're ready, and suggest driving 5 minutes north to the other Walmart. He nods, thanks me, and walks away towards the front. I thought nothing of it, and continued to cook popcorn chicken. 5 minutes later, the same customer comes back with none other than the Demon Queen herself, who's asking me about the rotisserie chicken. I once again attempt to explain how long the chicken has left to cook and the suggestion I made. No sooner am I finished speaking than she berates me for being lazy and telling a customer to go elsewhere. I ask what else is there I could do, as I couldn't make the oven cook faster. Her next words stick to this day. "I want you to do your job or you can kiss it goodbye." A moment of pause from everyone. Zoe and May have been listening in the entire time, as well as the customers they were helping. I ponder, then smile. Okay. I apologize to Zoe and May, wish them the best of luck, and walk out of the deli towards my manager. I stop in front of her, take off my apron, kiss it, say goodbye, and walk out of the store. I still have my name badge and hat to this day. I worked 25 years for a large company in the sales division. I was making 6 figures and had earned my role as VP of the West Coast. My plan was to stick around to retirement, but then we got a new president, and the new president was a jerk to everyone. I saw one sales guy walk up all excited and offer a handshake to meet him. The president didn't shake the extended hand, and instead said, "I can't believe you came here without polishing your shoes." The president gave a directive for me to stop hiring people with business or sales experience and to just start hiring attractive men and women, because in his words, "Their good looks will sell product better than the educated words of a veteran salesperson. Plus, they're young and work cheaper." I went along with this request and made 2 such hires. Then the next request came along. "Tell me who is the worst member of your team right now." I explained that my team was number 1 in the company and that we're all doing well. But the weakest one would have to be one 8-year employee who had had a bad year last year. He was making less frequent calls and the quality of calls was dropping. I had to place him on PIP to improve in 3 months. And he did. He busted his butt, worked long hours and weekends, and moved into the number 1 spot on my team. At the end of the 3 months, the president calls me to discuss the PIP. I explain the great progress and that I want to release him from the PIP because he's on track now. The reply was, well, there's probably other things wrong with him anyway, so terminate him and document it. Make sure to hire a young, attractive person as a replacement. I quit on the spot with 0 days notice, unusual for a white-collar job, and told him to do his own dirty work. Now I work as a high school teacher. I worked in shipping and receiving for a health food store. Over the past 5 days, everyone else had quit, including supervisors and department heads. I was working a frozen shipment, my regular job. Dairy came in and cheese came in, a little bit over $130,000. Huge fancy cheese and whole wheels, a large generally organic dairy shipment. I refused to sign anything. GM demanded I sign and put it away. Signing was already out of my pay grade. Those numbers made it way out of my pay grade. He then demanded I put it all away. It would have taken the rest of the shift for my own work. I just quit. Screw it. I heard that he signed it and it all went to waste. He ended up getting fired. I've only done this once in my life, but it was a really crazy situation. My first professional job was an event planner for a small business, like 3 people. I was 24 and I worked there for a year. After about 5 months, my boss became extremely abusive. She would make snide little remarks about my terrible skills or time management or organizing. She stopped talking to me and would basically act like I wasn't there unless it was to criticize me for something. One day, she asked me if I implemented a new filing system she had learned from the bank she used to work at. I replied no, as she hadn't yet shown me how to do so. She said, with a stack of papers in her hand, "Well, I guess giving you these would just be useless then." Another example is that she would find little ways in which I was being pert or snide in some way, usually something completely BS, and would make me sign forms saying we had meetings about my behavior and listed all the things we would do to change it and help me grow. Like I worked for a big corporation or something with an HR department, not a private office with literally one boss. If I argued why I wasn't doing so, she made me sign something saying I was refusing training. I literally have no idea who those papers were for. Things like that. It made me so paranoid and unhappy, I spent many lunches crying in my car, and many nights completely stressed out after work. I couldn't understand what had changed, and felt so stupid and helpless. My coworker had just left, so it was just the 2 of us, and I gave my 2 weeks because the thought of being alone in an office with her was unbearable. As soon as I left her office, she called her mom to complain about me ditching her and talked about how happy she would be with me gone, all while I was about 10 feet away in another room with the doors open. I lost it, got up from my desk and grabbed my purse, went to her office and told her I was leaving for good, right this minute. I was shaking and terrified, and she was furious. She told me, "Good luck finding another job in this town. I know everybody." Spoiler alert, I did. The kicker? What I didn't know at the time was that my coworker had been feeding her BS the whole time. When it started to affect how I was being treated and I would complain or talk about it, guess who also told my boss all of that? Yup, with many embellishments of course. I had 0 experience with people like that and overlooked many clues, like how she would stay after work a lot to finish her assignments, when in reality she was staying to tattle on me. I was just so new to the real world and naive. I found all of this out a few months later from one of her friends I ran into who she had also screwed over in some way. It made me stronger, and after I left, my boss had to deal with scrambling to find people to do all of her events, and I'm sure it was hell. I felt happy about that at first, but now that I'm 10 years older, I can see things differently. She definitely could have handled it better, but it was her first boss job too, and she maybe had some things to learn herself. I quit from a gaming site I used to write for. This all happened in the span of 2 months. The new owner made us writers lose all credibility by writing unedited articles on his own and posting them freely, and they were the most widely ridiculous and racist pieces I'd ever read. In one of them, he said women only bought the Wii because they used the Wii mode as a vibrator. It just made the rest of us look bad. He fired my friend simply because he didn't like him. He tried to claim my friend kept our review copy of Skyward Sword. There was more stuff that he did that I can't remember. My father died in December of that year. I informed everyone. I had also lost internet access for a while because my provider was switching the way their routers and stuff connected. I had too much going on at the time to deal with that. When I connected to the McDonald's Wi-Fi one day, I read a barrage of emails from the new owner, all amounting to, "Where are you?" and "Why aren't you writing anything?" I emailed him and CC'd everyone on the writing staff and told him he could go screw himself. 90% of the writing staff followed. 5 writers quit that day, and people took notice. The site never recovered, and today it only exists as a landing page and hub for one podcast that just refuses to die. After that, the owner took to stalking the guy who hired most of his writing staff, online harassment, and most recently, he hacked the previous owner's email and stole his Destiny 2 review code. He's still out there being a jerk, but I only hear about it since I have him blocked on all social media.
What do you miss that disappeared during the pandemic? Being able to afford things. Same salary and crazy inflation. What a great combo. I feel this, but I'm also jealous. I went from working minimum wage during college to making really good money, but having to move to an area with astronomical prices of living, plus inflation, so I still can't afford anything. When do I get to the part where I'm not living paycheck to paycheck? I thought at this level of income it meant that I would be rich. I miss when I enjoyed my job. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but COVID really changed the way my hospital runs, and not for the better. All the good staff that could jump ship did jump, and if they replaced them at all, it was with travelers or warm bodies, and our quality of care has certainly suffered. Not to mention the organization I work for is buying up all sorts of crap, but when we need vital equipment, we are told that there is no money for it. Even more insulting is this stupid freaking robot they bought that's sole purpose is to deliver things between departments. I'm pretty close to quitting healthcare forever at this point. Normally I don't entertain when people crap on America, but for real, as someone on the inside, our healthcare system is freaking appalling. Respirator therapist here. Pre-pandemic, I was super bubbly and chipper. It was easy for me to relate to patients and families. I used to wear bows in my hair. Patients loved it and said it brightened up their day. A year into COVID and the bows stopped. I stopped being able to connect with people because everyone was dying. I became closer to my coworkers, but basically was a robot to patient care. I still do all the things that were required of me and try to do extra when I can, but my heart, or what used to be my heart, isn't in it right now. I smile and say all the right things, but I don't feel like I used to. I'm trying to get back to my chipper, bubbly, unjaded self, but I worry that that part of me died with the hundreds of patients during the pandemic. I miss feeling like I was making a difference. A slight more reasonable cost of living. Everything has gotten so expensive across the board. And every industry is posting record profits. Even the egg shortage led to the highest quality profits in the industry that had ever been seen in America. Capitalism gonna capitalism. Restaurants having late hours and, more importantly, correctly posted hours of operation. I swear it's been like a crapshoot knowing when even large franchises will close, when their actual hours don't match Google, Apple Maps, or their own damn website half the time. Picking up lunch on the way to my overnight shift has become such a gamble. Like, is that place gonna be open or will the other place be open? I'll admit, I save some money by packing a lunch, but I miss picking up food twice a week on my way to work. 24-hour Walmarts and all-day breakfast at McDonald's. Stuff being open after 9. Working second shift got harder when everything closed after. Right? Sucks when your break is at 8 p.m., so when you get hungry, oop, everything's closed. Need to go grocery shopping after work? Nope. Stuff is closing before the sun even goes down, and it's killing me at my core. Went to Starbucks last night, Saturday, by second shift count, and they must have been closed at 8. Rushed to get something for dinner, place closed at 10 p.m. and I got there at 9:30. Pretty sure their sanitation standards dropped by 7 or 8. Because there was a freaking piece of wood in my steak and cheese. Not to mention the crap explosion I suffered soon after. So it's not even that everything's closed early, the standards have absolutely dropped as well. Not sure if this person lives in a town or a city, but I don't think before or after the pandemic had places closing that early. Starbucks has always closed at 10 p.m. where I live, except maybe on Sundays. Also, our major grocery stores don't close till 1 a.m. My social skills. Seriously, I found myself extremely awkward as things started opening up. Oh, and social stamina. Went to a baby shower for about 2.5 hours and to the department store for like an hour yesterday. Came home so exhausted, and I took a nap for an hour. Then a few hours later, I went to bed and slept for 13 hours straight. Like, what the freak? My job. Company went under. It was a love-hate relationship, but I suffered for it. Civility. I mean, it wasn't great to begin with, but post-pandemic, no one seems to know how to act in public anymore. I remember a viral video from the start of the lockdowns of a dad with a British accent telling a bedtime story to his kids about how the world was going to pull together and be even better after the pandemic was over. Narrator here, we didn't, and it isn't. No traffic, and no one. Everything wasn't crowded, and it didn't make me hate how people are literally everywhere. Dude, I relate. I remember driving on the highways and driving downtown at night, and there was absolutely not a soul in sight. It was pretty amazing and a little frightening. Closest thing to a post-apocalyptic world we might ever experience. My belief that most people are reasonable and compassionate. Me too. I used to be so optimistic and believed the good in people. I have completely lost all hope. And I just don't care about people anymore. Maybe I'm part of the problem, but damn it, I've lost any and all patience with anyone. 24-hour stores and food that had better quality. It seems like all food went downhill in quality. Fast food, sit-down restaurants, takeout, and grocery stores. Honestly, I've noticed that all the layoffs during COVID cut the hours and the business quality. Corporations don't want to return to normal. They make enough money now and pay less people to do the same job. General friendliness. People care less about each other than they used to. I'm a firm believer that people never cared about each other. They were just too scared of the social consequences of showing it, so everyone just got good at pretending. Driving skills. People have been driving like freaking idiots. The average normal driver, everyone on the road seems to be too aggressive and entitled, all while using their phone. My grandpa. I'm sorry for your loss. For everyone's loss. Father-in-law for us. Friends. So no one told you that life was gonna be this way? Clap, 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 clap. Paper menus. I'm tired of scanning QR codes and dealing with terrible interfaces and slow Wi-Fi just to order a meal. So true. A lot of restaurants I go to are in this weird internet dead zone. So loading a menu up on my phone is always such a massive pain. Honestly, I can't say I've ever had to do this. Is this like an LA, New York, or Chicago type thing? Empty areas. I very much dislike crowds, traffic, and lines. I remember my first proper drive during the strictest lockdown here. It was glorious. People. We were deemed essential services and were forced to work. We didn't want to be called heroes. The people did that to make themselves feel better. Now that COVID is over, the people are back to treating us like pure garbage again. Screw people. I quit my grocery job 2 years into the pandemic after being there since 2017. I would have people pass me and be like, "Thank you for your service." And then by halfway through the first year of it, I had people treating me like crap again. The level of stress and anxiety we endure was astronomical compared to years past. I drank the Kool-Aid and really believed that we were making a difference. But sadly, most could care less as long as they got what they wanted. As a team, we really had to lean on each other to get through it. And you really find out about one's character. I remember the great toilet paper pandemic. You'd wheel out a cage and it was picked clean before you even got to the TP aisle. You could take out a pallet of TP, unwrap it, and just stand at the end of the aisle with your manager just watching the absolute lunatics. We kept a stash of TP out in the back. If we saw a distressed looking old person / working person, we'd go up to them and be like, "Psst," and tell them to meet us by the staff door and we'd bring them TP. It was like being a substance dealer. Good fun. I started at a grocery store a little more than a month before the pandemic lockdown started. I never thought much of the pandemic, but early on there would be people coming in and thanking us for working, for being open, treating us like first responders combating the pandemic on the front lines. It's not that that's gone now, it didn't even last the pandemic. Lockdowns kept getting pushed further and further until it became the new normal. People became more and more frustrated and anxious in their daily lives. Holding up till mid-March, when it still felt like winter hadn't quite ended yet and it was going to be another 2 weeks. Only go out for essential reasons, people could do that. But then it stretched. The weather got nicer and people got cabin fever. People gradually learned and were told outright that your summer was going to be gone. Any plans you made, gone. The world is different and scary. Every day, fear for your lives. Soon, us heroes on the front lines were now the only people that were allowed to interact with and vent with those frustrations. People just wanted somebody to yell at, and we were the only ones available. Man, I worked retail for 5 years during the height of Black Friday when people were being killed for items, but after hearing so many pandemic stories, I can say that it probably wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I'll never go back to retail because people are the worst. My control over my phone and social media, it got so much worse. My confidence. After years and years of working on it, I'm back to square one and older. Keep working on it. I never thought in a million years that I would be as outgoing as I am now. Still not as much as other people, but a huge jump from where I was. Getting yourself out there and putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, little by little of course, makes a huge difference. It eventually just becomes normal. And fake it. I always fake being calm and confident, and slowly it started to become a reality. Communication, especially in business. It seems like people never want to get back to you. There was this all-you-could-eat place. You could sit there at the table and order off the menu. Everything was made fresh and brought to your table. They closed during the pandemic. I relate to this one in 2 different cities actually. In San Diego, there was this pizza place that was a few blocks from the convention center that I always ate at every single day of the convention. Doesn't look like they made it out of the pandemic. And in Austin, Texas, there was this burger joint that had a burger called the Ron Burgundy, and it was served with an egg inside of it on donut bread. It was one of the most delicious things ever. They had to resort to being a food truck and they only do donuts now. It's sad to see how many pandemic casualties there were. Now that I think about it, I lost me. I'm not the same person. I'm trying hard to find myself still, and it's been hard. I can certainly relate to that. It's interesting how fragile your self-identity is and how quickly it can slip through your hands. Thanks for sharing this. I've been struggling with the same but couldn't articulate it. I've never really loved myself, but I find I'm missing my pre-pandemic self more and more. I feel like I'm sharing mental space with a stranger. Idiot customers. They came back after the pandemic ended, and now there are arguably even more idiotic customers. There is this strange correlation I've noticed. The most obnoxious and most self-entitled ones were usually the unvaccinated ones. I work at a sports store, and during the pandemic, we had a few months long period where we had to check COVID passes to allow entry into the store, as we were non-essential. This was around the time of the second lockdown. Don't remember if it was before or after. It was like hell, because I was usually the one standing out in front checking the COVID passes with a scanner on the phone. Even though we had taped off the entrance so that everyone would have to pass around me, there were still people who tried to get in. Unvaccinated people were either trying to get in by lifting the tape or ignoring me. Some were spewing some conspiracy theory bullcrap about microchips or whatever. Some used their chance to get in when I walked away from the entrance for a few seconds. Some people were showing me COVID passes that were clearly not theirs. Some tried to beg their way in, and had some people that wouldn't let me scan their passes because they didn't want me to take photos of their phone. Spontaneity. A lot of the first come, first serve things are now booked months in advance. One small example is the park near my house has a free concert series during the summer. You used to be able to just show up the day of. You had to get there early for good seats, but generally no pre-planning. Now you have to get a ticket a month in advance and they sell out within minutes. Then you still need to show up hella early to get good seats. The belief that I had to be in the office to do my job. I am fully aware that I can do my job completely from home. I don't have to do that horrible commute every day. I'm sure I'll be back to that commute any month now. Affordable food. $100 used to get me meat, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, milk, eggs, cheese, yogurt, drinks, snacks, etc. That would last almost 2 weeks. Now $100 will get me food to last maybe a week? If I ration and only eat once per day a few times. Meat is now a treat if I happen to have a bit of extra money one month. Fruit and vegetables are out of the cans. No dairy at all anymore. Unless it's 1 or 2 of those $1.99 yogurt drinks, which were 75 cents in 2019. Most stuff I eat now is out of the package or cans. You know, I used to be a fast food fiend and I wasn't really cooking anything, but after the whole anxiety and panic attack stuff that I've done with, I've tried to eat a little bit better, and so I don't really know how crazy things were. But I will say buying fish is pretty expensive. The optimism that a global lethal pandemic would lead to our government trying to save lives and change our healthcare structure. In the US, of course. I owe all the zombie movie directors an apology. I always said that if that happened, everyone would band together and unite with a common front to solve the problem, and nobody would possibly be so stupid or selfish. Instead, we had people hoarding toilet paper. Man, did I call this one wrong. During lockdown, I actually felt like my mental well-being improved, and this was for several reasons, but one was that I felt there was less bragging on social media, at least in my family, and there was no family drama with the extended relatives because we weren't visiting each other. Everybody was scared and locked down, so nobody felt jealous of each other. There was bigger fish to fry. Then we got vaccinated, and then came the revenge traveling and revenge dining and so-called war on labor. And my aunts and cousins wanted to hang out again. And that opened the floodgates of family drama and constant sense of competition and no feeling good because that one cousin lost this much weight, one cousin has this much salary, one aunt got this much money from selling her house. I had to be the emotional support for my parents who were falling into these dumb status games. I missed those days in lockdown when my family stayed away and kept their status games to themselves. The 24-hour economy. Everything that was open 24 hours now closes at 9 p.m., midnight at the latest. Restaurants, grocery stores, gas stations, fast food, etc. As a person who worked third shift, I felt pretty normal pre-pandemic, but now I struggle to get my crap done, especially on my days off. My faith in humanity, seeing how unwilling people are to suffer mild inconveniences to try to reduce the chance of others getting seriously ill or dying, or make immunocompromised people able to feel safer in public, has destroyed my faith in others. The illusion that half my family and friends weren't selfish jerks. We had a newborn several months into 2020, and the people who refused to accept that were isolated, at doctor's orders. They fought against every boundary precaution we had for my son, including ones they had no problem with for his older brother a couple years before. These same people tried every loophole possible and put themselves at risk for the whole year. And don't get me started on their sudden anti-vax stance. Not only did they put my newborn at risk, but other valuable family members too. Honestly, most of them are one step away from Q. Most people miss late night shopping, late night restaurants. I've been thinking about opening a food truck only after 11 p.m. because there isn't any competition. I could probably make bank just selling grilled cheese sandwiches. My local value theater. For like a $4 ticket, you could catch movies that had left theaters months ago. Would always do special Sunday screenings of classic films too. I miss being able to walk down and catch a movie or two on a whim. Opened my eyes to older cinema as well. First saw Casablanca and Rebel without a cause there. Fell through about a year after lockdown since it was a mom and pop place that wasn't backed by a major distributor. I used to be really outgoing, loved to go to libraries and coffee shops, just to read and people watch, and loved random social interactions. After all the temper tantrums about wearing masks and people acting generally horribly, people just exhaust me. I don't want to go anywhere anymore. Flying being relatively painless. Yes, it was tedious, but you usually got on your flight, mostly on time, and nobody hit flight attendants, had a toddler meltdown, or tried to open the door mid-flight. Now you need to pad in at least an extra day, and it's scary. Choco tacos. A good reason not to have people over. It came and went during the pandemic, so I still consider that to be disappearing during the pandemic. It was nice to say, nah, we're isolating. I figured why not end this video with a personal story. One thing I missed was having a plan and a goal. For context, at the end of 2020, I quit my job in glorious fashion. Check out the Blaze of Glory video for that story. I decided to become a full-time content creator. I had saved up enough money to cover all my bills, food, gas, and anything else I needed for 6 months. I told myself that I would do everything I could in those 6 months to become a successful content creator. Things were going great for the first 2 months. I made about $1,000 each month from streaming, and I was putting out 10 videos a week across 2 YouTube channels. Then in February, I had a panic attack for the first time ever. Literally thought I was going to die. I was basically bedridden for 2 weeks out of fear. I couldn't even go into my stream room because that was where my panic attack started. I finally started getting better after a few weeks, and bam! Another panic attack while I was washing clothes. After that, my brain was shot. I lived in constant fear of having another panic attack. When I thought I was finally getting better, another panic attack would happen, resetting my brain. So this life plan that I had for the next 6 months was ruined by panic attacks. I got lucky with those government stimulus checks that allowed me to pay for my bills when my savings ran out. I lost all of 2021 to just trying to get back to a normal mental state that was livable. I didn't really understand anxiety or panic attacks before. I thought it was just people that couldn't handle pressure. But now that I live with it, man, I feel for people that have had to deal with this their whole lives, or just got them during the pandemic like I did. I'm a lot better nowadays. 2022 was also a struggle, but not as bad as 2021. My best advice is to become more active if you aren't. Start working out every day, drop the junk food, and learn to live with anxiety. It sounds stupid, but it has helped me the most. You gotta fight that urge to get comfortable and just live in the anxiety. Over time, you'll get used to it.
What do insanely poor people buy that ordinary people know nothing about? Growing up, my family had its moments of struggle. Our public transport system at the time had tickets which were simply hole punched with the date and month, not the year. So we'd save them and store them neatly in envelopes marked by month and concession or full fare. After a few years of saving tickets, we pretty much had free train and bus travel for the next 10 years, until they changed the ticketing system to electronically stamped tickets with barcodes. My office only has a unisex bathroom, so it has the facilities for men and women. Naturally, there's a tampon machine, and tampons are only 5 cents. Once a month, I'll work late, get a roll of nickels, and fill up a grocery sack with tampons for my wife. Extended stay housing or motels/hotels. When you can't qualify to get an apartment because you don't have proof of income, you end up wasting more money to stay for a week at an extended day housing or a cheap motel. It sucks having no home and being a transient. I promise myself never to be in the same situation again. I was so poor once that I would go to Long John Silver's and order a water and crunchies, which used to be free, then sit there and watch the people that would dine in. It was amazing how little they ate, and then they would leave without dumping their tray off in the trash. Fries, hush puppies, chicken, fish, all untouched. No, I didn't eat a piece that was bitten off of. I once saw a woman order a 2-piece fish and more for her kid that ate 1 hush puppy and a few fries, and then left the rest of it there. It was the best I had eaten in weeks. Glad that's behind me now. Lots of school systems do free lunches for kids under 18 during the summer. When I was a kid, I remember my dad taking us to get lunch at the school, then go play disc golf, soccer, or do something else free and fun. It was a blast, and I had no clue it was because we were poor. Dollar theaters, and sometimes they have a free afternoon or evening show for kids with the purchase of a parent ticket. Many movies were seen by the 3 of us for $4 with a shared popcorn and Coke. My dad was amazing at making us feel rich on basically nothing. When I was a child, Burger King ran a special kids meal where it was 2 mini burgers that were attached to each other like a weird conjoined burger experiment. Sometimes we would go. My dinner was 1.5 of the mini burgers. My mom was the half I didn't eat, and she would fill up on the free refills of soda. I've been both very poor and very comfortable. A lot of very true statements are already posted here, but here's what I haven't noticed. When you're broke, you can't plan ahead or shop sales or buy in bulk. People have to wait to buy something until they absolutely need it, so they have to pay whatever the price is at that moment. If 10 packs of paper towels are on sale for half price, that's great, but you can only afford 1 roll anyway. In this way, poor people actually pay more than others for common staple goods. Stuff on layaway. My mom would always go to this store that sold heavily discounted irregulars and put it on layaway for our new school clothes. This is actually a good question that can illustrate something. When you're poor, the system is set up to keep you that way. For example, how much do you pay to cash your paycheck? If you aren't and have never been poor, you probably said pay because you don't. Your check probably goes via direct deposit right into your checking account. But what if you have bad credit history such that you can't get a checking account? Well, now you have to pay to go to a check cashing service and pay money to get it. This means that out of your already low check, you get a few dollars less. If you're lucky, you can find a grocery store that will give your fee back and certificates to the store. But even then, they might charge you a small fee on top of that. How about this? How much is your car insurance? Did you know that if you get bad credit, it's higher? So now that you're poor, you get to pay more money for your insurance. And you'll find that the only landlord that will rent to you at a place not in the absolute worst part of town will ask you to double your deposit since you've had financial trouble in the past. It gets a lot worse. Your bad credit combined with your shaky job history and barren wasteland of a savings mean your options for transportation are severely limited. If you need a car, you'll have to go to one of those lots. Have you ever driven a car into the ground? I mean, put like 200,000 miles on it and drive it until it just doesn't want to go anymore? Then you take your jalopy into the local reputable Honda dealer and they give you $20 and a Snicker bar for it. What do you think they do with it? They certainly don't sell it at their lot, that's for sure. They aren't going to park your ridiculous hoopty next to their brand new Accords and Civics. Just being in the same vicinity of it drops their value. No, they usually have a deal with or ownership in one of those lots. Those lots are in bad parts of town. The office usually looks like a tool shed. They offer financing at rates that would make a loan shark uneasy. Their cars usually have a lot of miles and are guaranteed only to make it off the lot. Some of them will even rig up the cars with tracking devices so their repo men can find you easier. That lot will sell this hunk of junk to the kind of person who, more than anyone else, needs it to start every day and get them to work. When your car breaks down, what do? Probably take it to the shop to get it fixed. What if you had no money and no credit cards? And what if you were a week into a job in which you were as replaceable as a number 2 pencil? Well, hope you don't have any kids. At least then you might be able to call a friend or family member to help you out. If you have kids, now you have to find someone to help you drive them to your childcare provider, which you can barely afford as it is anyhow, and take you to work. Then pick you and your kids up. If you don't have kids, you can probably at least take a cab today. And then you can fall into another trap. You can get a short-term loan at 300% APR. People who have credit don't get these loans because they're predatory and sketchy. They take advantage of people who have no other options. Ordinary people may know a little bit about them, but usually just say, what kind of stupid person gets themselves into that? Without realizing that it's not a stupid option so much as a last resort for many people in poverty. When you're poor, you pay for everything. Many things that other people don't have to pay for, or just don't have to worry about. This is one of the fatal flaws of the bootstrap mentality in which fixing poverty is simply a matter of will. When you're that far down, the deck is entirely stacked against you. The world is rigged to keep poor people poor. I had to move out on my own when I was 17. I had no money at all and drove an old clunker Camry. I got a flat tire to match the flat spare in the trunk. I went to the discount tire on the east side of Indianapolis, where I was living, to see if they could patch it. When they got it on the rack, they said that the belts were showing around the tire. In fact, all of the tires, and I would have to replace all 4 tires. I thanked them, went outside, sat in my car, and started crying. The manager came out and knocked on the window. He said that he had a set of tires that would fit my wheels that someone had left when they got new tires. I told him, thanks, but I didn't have any money. He told me not to worry about it and when I graduate to come back and buy my tires from them. You can get new car parts from the junkyard for virtually nothing, with added discounts if you remove them from the junkers yourself. I had a 12-year-old car in college, and when it blew a tire, I went to the junkyard and found a decent set of tires. I bought all 4 for $70, which reduced my food budget to $16 for the next 2 weeks. Some lady in the grocery store saw me with a calculator trying to figure out how much ramen I could buy with $16 and handed me a $20. It made me cry. I'm glad I'm not poor anymore, but I'll always remember that lady. The first 4 years of my life were spent in abject poverty. As a child, I would ask my mom if we could get a candy bar. She would explain to me at age 3 that we could get the candy bar, but if we did, it meant we couldn't afford a 2-liter of Coca-Cola. She would phrase it like so: if you get the candy bar, it'll be gone in a few days. But if you get the Coca-Cola, we can have Coca-Cola for a whole week. Amazingly, I knew enough to understand that Coca-Cola for over a week was a better deal than 2 days of a candy bar. As a side effect, I was regularly told no when I asked for things I wanted, mostly Lego sets or He-Man toys. Around age 6, my father's stake in a mineral prospecting company finally paid off. Turns out he had been putting every dime he had into it since before I was born. We went from surviving on mayonnaise sandwiches to having 2015's equivalent of $10,300 per month in income. My little sister was around 2 or so at this time, and she was getting everything she wanted. For the first 6 years of my life, I had learned that asking for things I wanted would always end with no, so I never asked for anything. My parents weren't able to put it together until my grandmother got very sick and came to live with us. The whole family went out shopping, and my grandmother knew I loved Legos, but I didn't ask for a set of them. Meanwhile, my little sister had a Barbie doll and a My Little Pony in each hand. She stopped and asked me, "Poster, don't you want a Lego set?" Mommy and Daddy always tell me, "No, Grandma, we can't afford them." I only have a vague memory of this, but before she died, my grandmother told me this story and said that my mom broke down in tears in the middle of the store, sobbing. My dad had a look of defeated failure on his face, according to her. Apparently, it simply never occurred to them the reason I never asked for anything was because I had always been told no. For Christmas, I got 3 Lego Technic sets. It's not the things we bought. I grew up in a level of poverty in the entire 1980s and some of the 1990s that modern politicians will swear to you doesn't occur in modern America. After all, we have food stamps and welfare, and anyone still poor after that is obviously just a lazy addict bum. It's not the things we bought. We lived on powdered milk and rice and ramen, and before that, old wonton soup packets that I just realized don't exist anymore, and government cheese, and bread from the discount rack at the local bakery, about 9 minutes away from growing mold. But hey, at least it was only 19 cents a loaf. It's the things we scavenged. Hauling food out of the dumpster at 7-Eleven because they threw away piles of chip bags that were a day over their expiration. The manager caught us one day and they apparently told the employees to stab a hole in each chip bag after that. Eventually, we just had to sniff each bag to make sure nothing was contaminated. We would check neighbors' trash bins as well, rescuing half a pizza some idiots had ordered the night before then threw away after a handful of slices. We would haul in furniture from alleyways. My youngest sibling, my sister, received a twin bed mattress that had a grotesque brown stain on it. It looked like someone had pooped a gallon of wet feces onto it. We didn't care though. We scrubbed that down with bleach over and over and she slept on it for years. And then there were times when the welfare checks or food stamps didn't arrive, and the trash bins were not producing food. I grew up in a fairly rural area, and what did we do when that happened? Well, I know that in the winter, gray squirrel tastes pretty gross. Sure, people from the south can claim that their brown and red squirrels are delicious, but I would rather eat poop out of a pig's butt than eat another bite of squirrel meat, or jackrabbit, or dandelion greens. I guess I'm just saying that it's not what insanely poor people buy since they're insanely poor. They can't afford to buy anything. You can keep the electricity and rent paid, or you can, nope, there's not another choice. Food, medicine, clothing, furnishings, blankets, all of this is stuff you can pull out of the garbage. Powdered milk. I once worked in a call center, and an old lady called almost in tears that cable went up by $1.50. Her line that she repeated more than once was that she couldn't afford fresh milk and had to buy powdered milk. Unless it's due to a lack of refrigeration available or some sort of allergy, only the very poor would buy powdered over fresh milk. I knew a guy who, when he would get sick, would go to a livestock feed store and buy antibiotics and other meds that were meant for farm animals. There was another med he'd get at pet stores too. He would just cut the pills into smaller pieces and try to guess what the proper milligram amount was. It's apparently crazy cheap for certain meds, and doesn't require a prescription or government oversight like it would at a normal pharmacy. I had a really odd childhood. Until age 9, my family would have been classed as upper middle class. Then my father left and my mom just went crazy. From 9 to 18, we were dirt poor. I remember being 10 years old and our weekly treat was to go to the Little Woods Cafe, and they did a 99p 5-piece breakfast. We shared that among my mum, brother, sister, and me. One of us got the extra item. We'd take turns. As an adult, I've made sure my children will never know poverty because of excellent memories like that. Nothing motivates you more than memories of fighting over a solitary sausage. A buddy of mine went through a tough time a few years back, and I didn't know about it until he told me about a year ago. One thing that stuck with me was that he just made enough money to survive. By survive, I meant literally enough money to pay rent, utilities, and the cheapest, worst food he could buy. He couldn't afford transportation, not even the bus. He told me about a span of a few months he went through where he literally only ate water, dry noodles, and peanut butter for a few months. He worked at a restaurant and they'd cut his hours. He couldn't find other work. His first big reality check was that he had to sell his car to make rent one month. The next month, he started selling other unnecessary items, like his old TV, some other appliances, and his nicer clothes. So he got to the point where he was literally doing his laundry with dish soap in his sink. He couldn't afford deodorant, razors, or any of the things that we take for granted, so he'd steal them from the grocery store. He didn't like to do it, but he had no choice. He never got caught. When he told me all of this, I was floored. I wish he would have told me when it was happening. I would have helped any way I could. At that time, I was by no means living a fancy lifestyle, but I could have thrown him a 20 here and there to help him put some groceries in the house or some TP in the bathroom. In university, I used to buy 10 to 20 pound bags of potatoes, freeze-dried chives, and gravy mix in bulk. Not the supermarket packs which are $1 for 2 cups of gravy. Restaurant-sized packs that make 8 liters. That was often dinner, usually at the end of the month when money got tight. Sometimes I had even saved enough that I could have mashed potatoes with some sort of dairy or bacon grease. I also had a cheap tub of protein powder for weightlifters, and it was gross. But I would blend it up, usually with water, and hold my nose and gulp it down. It was actual protein, and slightly more healthy than a week-long diet of potatoes. Learning the times of the day when meat, bakery, fish, vegetable, and miscellaneous items are reduced to 75% off at the local supermarket. I've been learning this for years, but it's a good day when you find 400 grams of fresh mince for 99 pence, and you have a warm, filling food that you used to take for granted when living with parents. One thing I've noticed about being poor is that you become almost vegetarian, because meat just costs too much, fresh or frozen. Another thing would be buying the cheapest large container of yogurt and mixing it in jam for fruity yogurt. But that's not about being poor, that's just a good idea. At-home surgery. Used a pair of needle nose pliers, a razor blade, and some antiseptic superglue to remove a cyst on my forehead. The secret is to cut in a cat's eye shape, quickly push the skin back after you pull the cyst out, don't let it pop, and get the glue on fast. It hurts a lot, but it bleeds a lot and you have to get it on quick to stop the bleeding. Bags of frozen veggies and a couple packets of ramen can make a family meal. I used to buy these awful frozen chicken discs wrapped in bacon. They were terrible, filled with gristle and just nasty. Eating those with rice and frozen corn was a real treat. I ate mac and cheese every day for about 2 to 3 years because that was all I could cook while my mom worked. I could have made SpaghettiOs, but I hated those. That for dinner, and one of those cheap 99-cent packed donuts from the grocery store for breakfast. Lunch was a bologna sandwich and an apple. Finally, when I was about 10 or 11, I started teaching myself how to cook from my mom's old cookbook, so my meals got a lot better. All carbs and cheap fats, scalloped potatoes, rice, and cheap meats. My local bus service used to have paper transfers, so you'd pay your fare, get the paper transfer that was good for an hour, and then you'd use it for the next bus. But if you were only going to the station, you'd get a paper transfer anyway, then hang around the station for an extra 5 minutes to see if anyone needed it. Conversely, you'd wait around for people getting off the bus to see if you could score someone's transfer. This only worked if you weren't switching buses. But I got quite a few free rides this way, and gave many transfers away. Also, going without meds, living in constant pain because you can't afford a prescription. I remember laying in my bed at night, and my mom would be sobbing in her bed from pain because she couldn't afford the meds that would treat her rheumatoid arthritis or anything but generic Tylenol for her pain. I guess that's not really buying anything, but while we're on memory lane, there was also saving your birthday money from your grandma and aunts and uncles, so you could pay for a babysitting course that lets you babysit at 12. Got a babysitting job at 12 and babysat every day from 3 until 7 or 8 to earn some money. I'd give that money to my dad so he can pay his phone bill and put gas in the car. I got a real job at 14, working at a fast food restaurant so I could eat dirt cheap. Still gave my dad money, but this time knowing it was going to the casino or the bar, but still doing it anyway. Having worked in a dollar store, I saw some people come through who had to be pretty thrifty. First was dollar store steaks. Seriously, steaks for $1. If that doesn't sound sketchy, I don't know what does. Second, this was also a Hispanic thing I noticed. Fabuloso. That stuff cleans everything. I had no clue what it was till I grabbed a busted bottle to clean the bathroom one day. Third, you also get really used to pasta and rice. They're cheap and can be bought in bunches. And lastly, everyone bought 2 sandwiches from Subway because a third is free. Coupons like this go a long way. One last thing I noticed, and this is pretty bad, the dollar store's toilet paper is seriously better than the toilet paper my mom buys. Sacrificing my plate of food to feed my little brother and 3 little sisters whilst my mom gave up her food as well. I was 10 when this was happening, all while my obese, abusive stepdad ate steak and Brussels sprouts, lest my mom got beat. Luckily, he's gone now. Mom's somewhat stable and I'm 17. I'm saving up money right now, but that's one thing I fear being. I don't want to be hungry or unable to provide. I just remember telling my mom that I'm hungry and her breaking down and crying. Luckily, I had a best friend that I used to go to and bring leftovers from across the street back over. About a year ago, I was addicted to alcohol, 4,000 kilometers from home, dropped out of school, and living in my 20-year-old car. I got so used to eating microwave potatoes that I considered walking into a 7-Eleven and pocketing a handful of mayo packets while pretending to buy a hot dog. A special treat. I grew up distinctly middle class and generally didn't want for much. My recent experience has really put into perspective the difficulties experienced by people who are or have been in similar situations to myself, but bear the burden of direct responsibility to kids and family. Things have gotten a lot better since I've accepted the help of other people. Seriously, even relatively tiny gestures of kindness will go a long way with someone who's literally struggling for survival. Never underestimate the impact you can have upon another person's life. I'd probably be dead by now if it weren't for the unconditional love and support of friends, family, and random strangers. Instead, I'm 25, relatively healthy again, and back in school trying to finish off my engineering degree. It's not really about what you buy, it's about what you can make or substitute. Can't afford to run to the gas to run the stove and want that French toast? Toast the bread on the barbecue, grill melt some butter, and sprinkle cinnamon sugar on it. Can't afford real spaghetti? Mix some tomato soup and butter. Heat till warm, pour over some ramen, and you have yourself some poor man's spaghetti. You'd also be surprised what you can get for almost free at garage sales or online. Teachers of Reddit, they say there are no stupid questions, but what's the most stupid question a student has ever asked you? Not a question, but more a statement that prompted a whole discussion when I was student teaching. To set the stage, I'd like to point out that I'm white and my leading teacher was African American, and the classroom was about 60% African American, 30% Latino, and the remaining 10% a mixture of Asian and white. This was also my advanced class, and we were discussing the apartheid in Africa. Me. So the black Africans and white Africans, and I immediately get interrupted. A student raises their hand. Miss Ducky, you can't say that. Me. Say what? Student. Black. It's African American. Me, trying my hardest not to die a little inside. No, that is actually not the correct phrase. Can anyone tell me why African American is not the correct term for this situation? I'm met with silence. Me. Okay guys, look at it this way. Are we talking about Americans? No, we're not. We're talking about a racial issue in Africa with no relation to America at all. The definition of African American is a person of African descent living in America. So if the people we're talking about are not American, they can't be African American, can they? So to talk about the racial issue, the labels are used as Black Africans and white Africans, as outlined by our textbook. Student. No, you can't say that. They're African American. At this point, my lead teacher is facepalming. She's in total disbelief, and as much as she loved to watch me struggle, she stepped in and tried to explain it as well. 20 minutes go by of the two of us really trying our best. The bell ends up ringing, the kids still couldn't figure out, and I think we both nearly cried. Grade 5 Sex Ed. I had a rule that any question can be asked, but I might ask you to ask your parents instead of me. I heard a story about a man who put his stuff into muffins and then fed it to grade 1 kids. Well, that's pretty disgusting, and I would think that person would go to jail for doing that. Wouldn't the girls get pregnant from eating it? And before I could say anything, another student blurted out, "No, they wouldn't get pregnant. They haven't gone through puberty yet." I'm thankful for days when kids remind me that they're still kids. I actually had a student ask me, what are those pyramid-shaped things in Egypt called? I've never seen a class laugh that hard before. I once projected a picture of the Earth onto the front whiteboard. A student asked, how do astronauts stand on a planet like that? This was an 8th grade student being totally serious. 9th grade ELA, a few chapters into Of Mice and Men. What kind of work does George do on the farm? I'm not sure. Probably the same work that everyone else is doing. Oh, it must be hard for him to help out since he's a mouse. At the college midterm, I had a guy come up to me that I've never seen in class. He proceeded to ask me what his grade is. I checked the sheet and he never turned in a single piece of homework, no quizzes, and never attended a test. What did you think you'd have? You got a solid F. After a lengthy explanation of the effects of volcanic eruptions on human communities, I had a grade 6 student ask me why on earth people even make volcanic eruptions. While I was student teaching, I had a student ask where Texas was on the map I was projecting on the screen. The map was of China. I'm a private writing instructor. A couple of years ago, I had a student ask me if commas were real or imaginary. He was equally dubious about semicolons, which he referred to as imitation periods. He was 26 and very serious. In 7th grade science during sex ed, they were talking about oral sex. A Mormon girl in class said, "Wait, you can get an STD just from talking about sex?" I wouldn't call the question stupid, just no exposure at all to the topic beforehand. I was asked by a crying student once if there was a second moon. We were outside for recess, and as happens sometimes, the moon was visible. I said no. Why? And she pointed to the moon and asked, "But aren't the sun and moon the same thing?" 4th grade student, not special needs or anything. She was crying because the other kids were making fun of her for thinking the sun and the moon were the same thing. After I explained to her that the sun did not turn into the moon at night and then back into the sun in the morning, I did an impromptu science lesson that afternoon with the whole class. This came up all the time when I was teaching kids how to do their taxes. I must have had this conversation a dozen times. "Sir, I don't know what to do with this part." What does the instruction say on the line? "Add box 23 and 24 and write the answer here." So add box 23 and 24. I, to this day, have no idea how you teach someone to follow very explicit instructions. As part of teaching US government, I ran a zombie apocalypse scenario where the students had to respond to an ongoing crisis in real time, using the actual powers of the government as different parts of the government. It was my favorite activity all semester, and I went all in, including a large map of the US that would be updated every day that passed. As part of this activity, I prepared a handout of a fake news story about the zombie apocalypse beginning in our hometown. It had pictures of zombies shambling around and was written all newspaper style. One day after handing these out, an 18-year-old student raised their hand and said, "Mr. Poster, did this really happen?" I had a pupil ask me if the sun they saw in America was the same as the sun we saw here in Scotland, and why was their sun so much warmer? In health class, while going over reproduction, there was a student who raised her hand and asked if you were sterile, could you pass it on to your children? The whole class giggled, and she, confused, said she was serious. She wanted to know if you're sterile, could you pass it on to your kids? I said to her, "Okay, let's think about this. What does it mean to be sterile?" She started answering, "It means you can't have Oh. Followed by another round of laughter from the rest of the class. For sex ed class, we had a box where students could submit questions anonymously. One day, one of the questions asked, "My dad's bits are circumcised, but not mine. Does this mean he isn't my dad?" Yeah, they believed circumcision was hereditary. I used to do volunteer teaching at an after-school program for 14-year-olds. We were doing a project that involved balloons. One boy had blown his balloon but couldn't get it tied. I tied it and gave it back to him. He immediately tossed it up. As it sank to the floor, his face fell. Obviously disappointed, he asked, "Aw, so they're not helium?" Warm spring day, no AC. Fan blowing in the front of the room. Hand goes up. "Can you make the fan ovulate?" No, I cannot. My wife is a teacher, but this is my favorite story of hers. They were discussing how Native Americans relied on hunting buffalo and used all parts of it for food, clothing, shelter, etc. In reference to how they used the buffalo for shelter, one student asked, "So do they stack the buffalo on top of each other?" This one kid in my 10th grade biology class takes the cake for me. We were going over chromosomes, talking about the effects of an extra chromosome, Down syndrome, and this kid looks confused as hell, gears turning like mad in his head. Finally, he raises his hand. With the extra chromosome, shouldn't they be like superheroes? Most of the idiotic questions I get are linked to history, even though I'm an English teacher. They have no idea about different time periods or a sense of centuries. So I would get questions like, why didn't Dickens just get on a plane? Was the internet not around then? Then being the 1700s. Were the Victorians around when dinosaurs were? And these are 14 to 16-year-olds. It gets even harder for them when thinking about the few decades prior to their existence, i.e. the 50s through 90s. I wonder if we're all like that a little when we're so young. I was a teacher's assistant for a geography class. I had been the teacher's assistant for this class for 3 semesters, and the professor had decided to retire. New professor comes in and tries to make this class as not boring that it could possibly be. In her defense, she did teach the class with enthusiasm. Anyway, the second project for the class was a short presentation about different resources of the world, renewable energy, non-renewable, etc. I tell 90 plus students and email every single one of them to email me their presentation when they're done, and I'll put them on a list for the order of presentations. I get a good 60 to 75 presentations. The week of presentations, I sent out an email with the list and get a good 10 or so emails back asking why they weren't on the list. I calmly explain to them the aforementioned instructions and send out a new list. On the first day, 5 more students ask me the same question. A bit irritated, I explain to them as well and announce it to the class once more. The list gets very long, and the students' lack of preparation continues. Presentations get extended to 2 or more weeks, and in those 2 weeks, the stragglers email me. At this point, I've lost my hope in humanity, and I just get more and more irritated. I had done everything to ensure that every one of those students knew what to do for presentations, even if they were out sick. They still had an email that they needed to check in case an announcement was made. It stuck with me for the rest of the semester, and I found out from my professor that some students complained about me as being the worst and rudest TA they ever had. This one is one of my favorites. I had one of my choir students sitting there studying her hands for about 10 minutes. She wasn't really singing, just quizzically looking at both sides of her hands. So I finally asked what was so interesting about her hands. Her response? Well, I was wondering, are gloves like underwear for your hands? No, they're not. Later that year, she was also surprised to learn that helicopters were started inside the cabin of the helicopter and not by a gigantic ripcord pulled by a bunch of people. Let me give you a bit of context first. I teach social science in Sweden, ages 16 to 18, and this particular question came from an 18-year-old. We had been working on a theme about crime, punishment, and legislation, and we had devoted a couple of hours on the issue of file sharing, whether it should be legal or illegal, the morality of it, etc. So, on the test, I included a question about file sharing, both because I knew we had covered it in class and because I knew that every single one of them was guilty of file sharing. As I always do when handing out a text or quiz, I ask my students to read all questions before starting to answer them. As they started reading the questions, one of them looks up at me and asks, "Mr. Poster, what is file sharing?" There was a moment of complete and utter silence in the classroom, and then his classmates opened up on him. And my God, they were savage. The thing is, he just experienced a temporary brain freeze. Test nerves, probably. And I could see in his eyes right after he asked the question that it dawned on him. To his credit, he took it like a champ. Just sat there and nodded as he got roasted so bad that not even the best burn ward would have taken him in as salvageable. 10th grade honors chemistry. Topic is states of matter. What would liquid ice be called? We're still not sure if he was making a joke about the short-lived icebreaker mints, liquid ice, because everyone was laughing too hard. Elementary student after leaving their backpack on the bus. Someone should invent some sort of device that attaches a backpack to a person's body so they don't lose it. I'm a casual lecturer and have a young family, so only work the hours I'm paid. Quite often, I'll get a student not show for the entire semester, then in the last week appear and ask why I can't teach them out of hours. There have been tears and complaints when I basically said that if they'd shown up to class, they'd know what they were doing, and I have better things to do with my life than support lazy students. If you drink too much Gatorade and fill up to here, points at throat, do you drown? You know there's stuff in your body and you're not just a hollow tank, right? Here's my personal favorite. We were watching documentaries in black and white. I think about the Great Depression. A kid raises his hand and I call on him. He says, "Never mind, it's a stupid question." I say, "There are no stupid questions. Go ahead." He proceeds with, "Did they have color back then? Like in real life?" I was dumbfounded and could not keep a straight face. Turns out there are stupid questions. Whenever I have a professor that tells us to ask anything because there are no stupid questions, I immediately raise my hand and ask, why do meteorites always land in craters? My cousin is a teacher, and one day he had to teach a sex ed unit to the class. You know, the ones where everyone splits off into boy and girl groups so that they can put any question in a hat and have it answered anonymously. He's a guy, so he was answering the questions for the boys. So he got some questions that were clearly looking for stupid answers and threw them out. As usual, certain jokers were trying to get a rise out of him. Then he got a question that asked, why do you have to have an erection to have sex with a girl? This one he couldn't avoid. He didn't know if it was serious or not, so he decided he would have to answer it. He said, you know how you have the plastic tip on the end of your shoelaces to get it in the hole? It's kind of like that. This may be the greatest metaphor I ever personally heard of. We're getting ready for a field trip in a class of about 20. I make the announcement, we're leaving in about 10 minutes, go to the bathroom and fill up your water bottles. Everyone's getting ready and standing around, and one of my students comes to me in a panic. Excuse me, have we left yet? We all look around at everyone standing by the door or by their desks. No, I don't think we've left yet. Good grief. I was only student teaching at the time. It was a high school biology class on human reproduction unit. We're talking about sperm. My mentor teacher asks, so what is the purpose of glucose in human sperm? A student replied in a genuine manner, so that it tastes sweet? Not really a question, but an answer to a question. I was teaching a world history course to 10th graders and asked the question, what does AD mean? A couple kids took a shot but were wrong, and a girl who fit the absolute textbook description of a stereotypical cheerleader raised her hand and answered as confidently as someone would answer that the sky is blue or grass is green with, after dinosaurs. I'm a teacher in an urban district with a high immigrant population. I've been asked why people don't fall off the bottom of the earth, if anyone lives on Mars, if Jewish people really are aliens, etc. Neither the questions nor the students were truly stupid. Many students had simply been raised in areas with little or no formal education, or by parents who themselves were incredibly negligent, superstitious, and/or uninformed. I teach history and religion. As I was driving with one of my students, I passed a church that I briefly attended my freshman year of college. Pointing it out, I mentioned that they were a fundamentalist Protestant church, and I asked her if she knew the history of that church. And I kid you not, her literal and immediate response was, yeah, aren't they the ones who followed Martin Luther King Jr. when he broke off from the Anglican church but kept everything almost exactly the same? Yeah, she somehow blended 3 separate religious reformations from 3 very different periods of time, confused which churches were a part of those reformations, and somehow threw the American Civil Rights Movement in there. It was pretty bad. We were discussing the plight of African Americans during Reconstruction. If black people had such a bad time in America, why did they immigrate here? I immediately saw the black kid behind her sit up and silently mouth, "What the F?" Sadly, this was in a high school honors course. I will say in the girl's defense, she immediately knew how idiotic that question was and turned bright red. Cringeworthy moment for all. I'm a teacher, and there really are no stupid questions from students. And if you read the responses, you'll see that they're mostly just questions from genuinely curious kids who have big gaps in their knowledge or understanding, which is not their fault, but the fault of previous teachers, their parents, or something they've read or heard about only in passing and misunderstood. The only questions that frustrate me are the ones that are willfully ignorant or are asked as a joke and derail good discussions, or by a student that ignored my long and detailed instructions asking me the exact question I just spent minutes answering. But when you're dealing with 12 to 14-year-olds, it comes with the territory, and it's all entirely forgivable. And I'm a teacher to help them learn how to be thoughtful humans. My parents used to teach identical 6th grade science curriculum at 2 different schools and grade papers at home together. They would read the dumbest answers aloud, one-upping each other until they had a winner. The only answer I remember clearly was to the question, what is the smallest thing in the universe? One kid answered, about the size of 2 potatoes. I teach 2nd grade in Massachusetts, but I'm originally from Texas, so I had someone from home be pen pals with my class. My kids were writing letters to their pen pals. They're supposed to tell them something about themselves and then ask them some questions. Miss Poster, Do they speak English in Texas? Do I speak English? Yes. Am I from Texas? Yes. So what do you think the answer to your question might be? Maybe? So we spent the day talking about the Japanese attack and America's entrance into World War II. Student number 1. Wait, is Pearl Harbor still alive? Raucous laughter until student number 2. Of course she's dead. I was teaching a history class that was learning about the invasion of the Huns and the fall of Rome. During silent reading, a student raised their hand and called me over. He asked me, were these like half horse people? I was really confused and asked why he thought that. It says here they were skilled horsemen. I told him that just meant they were good at riding horses, not that they were centaurs. I teach 4th grade, and a student did some great work, and I made an offhanded comment about how I love my job. Another student asked, what's your job? I teach preschool, so I could go on and on about dumb things. But my favorite is this story. During group time one day, I couldn't help but notice one of my kids had a very strong poop odor. I pulled him aside and asked if he had had an accident. He proudly said no, and that he made it just in time. I suggested he go wipe again and double check. About 5 minutes later, he comes to me with his hands covered in poop. He said I didn't tell him what to wipe with, so he just used his hands. I was holding study hall for 11th and 12th graders. From the back of the room, a few students began arguing back and forth. When I asked what was going on, one of the girls looked me straight in the eye and asked, is it true that you can still get pregnant from anal sex? I ultimately was forced to get an anatomy book and hold a mini health class. I had a kid in 7th grade ask me how people decide which day is their birthday. When I explained to him that your birthday is the day you were born and you don't get to choose it, he couldn't believe it and acted as if I told him he just won a million candy bars. I think the dumbest question I've heard went along the lines of, isn't it a fact that conservatives just want to conserve money and liberals just want to liberate people in need? This kid's a senior in college and has been a part of 2 major elections. Like, come on, man, how do you not know the difference? Chemistry teacher here. I'm regularly asked, can I drink this, miss? When students work with chemicals. The solution is bright blue with a hazard label on it. What do you think? Those who have walked out on first dates, what was your I'm outta here moment? Legitimately, when she said she needed to take a wee as we walked down a back alley next to the bar. She pulled her jeans down, took a poop behind a bin, then searched in the bin and wiped with a sheet of newspaper. I was totally infatuated with her after working with her for a few months, and in 30 seconds, it completely disappeared. Fast. Went to meet a guy for the first time at his house. There was a pile of toenail clippings on his coffee table, and it wasn't one recent clipping. It was like many clippings. I quickly left. She had 22 cats and would just randomly take in strays, not give them any vet care, and was planning on keeping a recent litter. I love cats. I paid the bartender when she went to the bathroom and hyper walked to the door. I forwarded her contact info and a summary of what she told me to the Humane Society. This guy and I were eating dinner after chatting for a couple of weeks, and unprompted, in the middle of something I was saying, and completely unrelated to what was being discussed, he said something along the lines of, so you know in order for this to work you're gonna have to share yourself, right? My friends and I like to pass girls around. I was pretty dumbfounded, and after a bit of stuttering, I told him I didn't think it was gonna work. I asked for a to-go box and my portion of the check and noped out of there. I had a first date with a girl who insisted we go to a really expensive place, where she ordered a $25 appetizer, $45 steak, and a $15 drink. She also wouldn't put her phone down, kept taking calls and answering texts. The waitress noticed and motioned for me from behind her. I excused myself, and the waitress had made separate bills and asked if I wanted to pay my share and leave hers at the table. I said that would be wonderful, so I did. He invited me and a friend to play dodgeball with a group of folks I've never met. We're having an okay time, but he's paying more attention to his friends. But that's fine because I've got my friend to keep me occupied. We're hanging out in the parking lot before the first game is about to start when out of nowhere he grabs a ball and throws it at my crotch as hard as he can. This dude screams, wham bam right in the clam. I immediately turn to my friend and ask her if she's ready to leave. I say goodbye to him and his friends, immediately come home to a gripe of texts about how immature I was behaving. I was on a first date with a military guy. He spent a large portion of the date talking about why the strippers in Toronto were better than the strippers where we lived. To change the topic, I asked him if he did any volunteer work with military overseas. And he said, "No, I joined the military to kill people, not help people." I got my bill, chugged my beer, and left as fast as I could. The fact that within 10 minutes of meeting him, he started making sexual comments and joking about following me home so he could stalk me if I rejected him. I got out with the help of a bartender who let me leave out the back door. Not me, but this happened to a friend. For context, this friend has a beard. So my friend picks up this girl and they're on their way to dinner. And she says, "You do realize that if this is gonna work, you have to shave that off, right?" He didn't say anything, just turned around and dropped her back off at her house. This is meeting someone from an online dating app. He turns up with pupils the size of dinner plates and super erratic. He said he'd forgotten his wallet, so I got the first round. We were on our way to the second pub to meet his friends so they could lend him some money. For the walk there, he spoke absolute garbage and nonsense nonstop, but ended with how he tried to drown his ex's chihuahuas in a pool. Near the pub, he said he had to answer whoever was calling him on the phone. At this point, we were 30 minutes into the date and already going to the next pub. He downed his drink in about 3 seconds. Whilst he stood there on the phone, I said I'd meet him at the pub. Everything was in close proximity, but instead, I walked past it and ran all the way home. 1 p.m. lunch date, and she was drunk as a skunk. She invited me back to her place where she said her 2-year-old son wouldn't even notice. I noped out and called her a cab home. I still feel bad for the son years later. She finally let it slip that she had a boyfriend, but it was totally fine because things have been going bad for a long time and I'm gonna break up with him anyway. My thoughts were that if she would do that to him, she'd do it to me. No thanks. We had great chats online and decided to meet in person. He's got a Bluetooth headset on with a little LED light that shows it's on. He keeps it on during drinks. I work up the nerve to ask if he can take off the headset while we're eating dinner. With pride and complete confidence, he says, "Don't worry, you'll have my full attention. This isn't a phone headset, it's a camera." Invited me to a bar which was apparently close to his apartment and kept wanting to snuggle at his apartment with me. I left to a friend's party and met the man I'd been with for 3+ years. The first guy later texted me explicit photos on Easter Sunday. She brought her pet rat with her that was hanging out in her bra and kept feeding it french fries. She casually mentioned she had warrants, so I just faked an emergency and bailed. He started making inappropriate comments, then took me to his house to use the bathroom before the next part of our date. We had lunch first, then we were supposed to play mini golf. I didn't know he lived with his parents, so I had to meet them on the first date. They were nice, but I felt so uncomfortable because I already knew this wasn't going to move beyond date number 1 thanks to his remarks. He told me to wait in his room while he went to the bathroom, and I noticed that his computer was on. Before our date, he was chatting with a friend and left it up on the screen. The last message he'd sent said, "I hope I get to see her boobs. I bet they're so perky and small." What? Why leave that up and send me in there to see it? I lied, saying that my mom called with an emergency and needed me back home. Noped out of there and never spoke to him again. I had to pick him up and he complained about everything. My car, the way I drove, my music taste, why was I being so quiet whilst carefully plotting my escape plan? But it was definitely the moment he said, "My friends really want to meet you. I need them to know you're real." And that's when I bounced. He was 45 minutes late picking me up. Weather was quite poor, so I gave him a pass. We get to the coffee shop, I take off my jacket, and immediately he says, "Oh, I see you brought your A game. Or should I say D game?" Referring to my breasts. I'm surprisingly busty for my frame. Even the people 2 tables over just stopped and looked at him. I had invited a guy off a dating site to my house. When I opened the door, he said he could kill me if he wanted and to never meet anyone off the internet again. My 2 male roommates were in the kitchen because they knew this guy was coming and heard him. They ran him out of the house pretty damn quick. We started by chatting online. At the time, I was a smoker and told him. He said no big deal because he smokes too. We decided to meet up at Starbucks for coffee. First thing he said, "Hi, by the way, when I said I smoke, I was talking about meth." I said, "Oh, bye," and turned around and left. The guy wanted to meet at a place where I used to work at. I showed up and he was already there. I ordered vodka and we're glaring into the menu while his shots arrive and he's just pounding them back. The base bartender is giving the stink eye. I know him, so I'm like, WTF. The date steps out for the bathroom or to vape or something, and the bartender beelines to my table to warn me that this guy is a raging alcoholic that messed around with his cousin a few months back. I noped right out of there. I had a first date with a girl who told me, "Actually, I'm engaged, but I'm not 100% sure if he's the right one. So I'm just gonna go on a few dates to see if I change my mind." Check please. He invited me inside while he finished getting ready. No biggie. Once inside, he insisted that I let him show me his dungeon. Dude's apartment was pretty empty, minus a TV and couch, but his bedroom was kitted out. He then wanted the now uncomfortable me to see if the shackles on his bed fit me. Thankfully, I had set up for a friend to call me within the first 30 minutes of the date, and I faked an emergency. We were having the usual get-to-know-you conversation over drinks. I was telling her about how my car was stolen the night before, and her response was, "Don't you just hate blacks?" I never said who stole it. I was out of there. I hadn't even met the guy yet. We were still chatting online to set up the first date. We were going to be busy at different times that weekend, but I was interested and sincerely offered to meet a week later instead. He proceeded to get drunk by himself and sent a ton of sad messages about how he couldn't get a date and he was unattractive and I was totally gonna bail on him. Which wasn't the plan before, but it certainly was now. I have a few. Number one, he told me I wasn't pretty enough to be so confident. Like, what? I was shocked, but the server came to my rescue and was like, "Girl, get out of here. No charge for your drink." Number two, he told me that people looking at his sleeve tat without permission was the equivalent of women being assaulted for wearing skirts. What? Number three, I sat down across from him and within 5 minutes of meeting me, he tried to slide his hand up my dress under the table. Yikes. Number four, he told me he had too many back issues of The Economist to read, so he couldn't read anything I might suggest ever. And number five, he told me his fiancée of 9 years had dumped him the week before. We were back at her place. She pulled out a giant glass jar that was full of what I thought was moonshine. She proceeded to explain to me that it was 100% GHB and that her kink is to be drugged with it before sex. She went into the bathroom and I got the hell out of there so fast that my imprint on the couch probably wasn't gone by the time I was driving. He was a friend of a friend. We went to a restaurant and ordered our food. While we waited, he started to say things like, "I'll eat this meal first, then I'll eat you out." I laughed because I thought he's just joking. I thought he's just nervous and his mouth lost his filter. Then when the waitress later asked if we want more to drink, he was like, "Yes, bring us something strong." I said, "Not for me, and that I have to drive later and just want a Coke." And he looked at me and was like, "Don't be stupid. You think we'll just do it once and I'll let you leave? You'll at least stay the night." The waitress looked at me with wide eyes like I'm crazy for even being there. After she left, I told him that he has to stop with this, that it was rude and that we're on our first date. He apologized and for 10 minutes it was okay. Then, as if a switch was turned on, he said just like that, mid-sentence, without even ending his previous story, "You know what, I can't control myself anymore. Either we go now or I'll screw you on this table." I told him I have to go to the bathroom. He complained like a baby that we have to go now. I went away anyway and went to the waitress, paid for the food, and left without a word. She wouldn't stop making fun of me. She was 26 and I was 36. Though if it matters, we were at the same place in our careers and income. She kept making jokes about my age, about how old and decrepit I was. Eventually, after telling her pretty directly to lay off, I just said, "You know, I'm not enjoying this. I'm gonna go," and paid for the table and left. Later, she said it was because she was overcompensating because she was self-conscious about how much younger she was. But that just means that when she's uncomfortable, she goes straight to demeaning the other person. It only happened once. She kept talking about her ex. I asked if she wanted to get back with him. She said, I don't know, and showed me a picture of him. I couldn't leave fast enough. I drove us. I started to parallel park. I had been working in parking in San Francisco for years by then, and he said, I'll park this for you. Women don't do well at parallel parking. At dinner, he was dismissive only to female waitstaff. I ran into these two hilariously drunk surfer dudes on my way from the bathroom, and they told me my date was a jerk. We laughed about it, and I went back to my table. When leaving, the drunk dudes were also outside. I said bye to them, and Jerkface had the nerve to bark, She's with me. I told him to wait while I got in the car and unlocked the doors. Except I didn't. I drove off and left him standing there. The two drunk dudes whooped and yelled, Go, lady, go! Such an awesome finish to a terribly embarrassing date. It seemed to be going all right for a while. We meet late afternoon and went for a stroll around town, doing a bit of a pub crawl with a drink at each, followed by some food at a monthly food truck festival I knew about, which was going to be followed by a local bar and dancing. I kept seeing the same guy at all the locations, obviously following us. On a toilet break, I mentioned something to one of the pub doormen, who asked him to leave politely, although that got a little heated. She ran over to the doorman and explained that it was her husband. They had a thing of watching each other go out with someone and maybe watching them have sex. I did drop in a question if they had ever done more, like stealing from someone, and she accidentally said that it happened, but only a couple of times, before trying to say that she didn't mean it. I left them with the doormen and reported them to the police. I go to a bar and meet this cute girl, and we get along pretty fine. She invites me back to her place, but it turns out that she was with her friends at the bar and they were just giving her some space for us to talk. They were all drunk, and her friend was insisting on driving home, so her friend, agreed to let me drive them home, because the friend was very set on not leaving her truck parked outside a bar overnight. We get all the way to their apartment complex, and then getting into the parking spot was tricky. So the drunk friend/truck owner insisted on parking, and pulled the I legally own this vehicle card. I was some guy her friend met at a bar, so I was like, okay then. Within 5 seconds, she backs the truck into a drainage ditch and gets it stuck. We all have to push the truck and get covered in mud. While we're doing that, the girl I met at the bar had lost her wallet. So I dug through the mud water ditch at like 4 a.m. and didn't find her wallet. We get back to her place and the mood is definitely ruined. So we end up eating a random cheese and meat platter from Safeway on her kitchen floor at like 4 a.m. I sleep on the couch and wake up early and I think, well, she was great. It was just the whole truck thing that ruined it. I look for a pen and paper to write down my number before leaving. All I can find is a piece of paper taped to the inside of the door. It was a court date for a domestic violence/abuse hearing. I just left and chalked it up as a strange night. When he asked me to change my clothes because they weren't sexy enough and told me what I had to order for food, he ended the date by talking about his gun collection. Blind date set up by my grandparents. I love my granddad, and he's done so much for me, so I went. We met at a bar where my best friend worked. We get drinks and I'm talking to my friend. My date says, "This homo trying to hook up with you?" 1, he's not gay. 2, it wouldn't matter if he was. 3, he was just checking in on me. So I'm already done with him at this point, but my ride is still over an hour away. His mate shows up at one point and starts trying to flirt with me. It was gross. My date then starts asking about my hot friends and if I can get them to come out. I said, I like my friends, so no. He starts being racist against Pacific Islanders and was horribly rude to this German guy there drinking. When my ride gets there, I said, I'm leaving. He says, I got a big one for you. You should come home with me. I said, thanks, but I'd rather gouge out my eyes. The next day, he messaged me and said, you probably think I'm a bit of a jerk after last night, but do you want to go out again? I had no intentions of ever seeing him again. So I explained why his behavior was unacceptable and suggested he try making friends who are girls so he sees them as something other than a hole to stick his prick in. I told my grandparents everything. They told his parents, and apparently his dad was super embarrassed. My grandparents were then informed to stay out of my love life. And anytime they brought it up, I just say, I got a big one for you. You should come home with me. I work in fine dining. A friend of mine showed up to my restaurant on a first date with a guy who arrived drunk as a skunk. She's an absolutely beautiful, hilarious woman with a great career. Truly a catch. Friday night, full restaurant. Their tables in the middle of the floor where everyone could see. He continued to burn through 3 bottles of wine, started making some bad jokes about her looking loose. She suggested he stop drinking. He reached across the table and slapped her. We all ushered her out, and a bunch of men at the other tables were about to beat his butt, but we held them back until he paid his bill. He didn't have enough money and said he was planning on making her split the $300 tab with him. We called the cops. Bye, Patrick. Another time, I helped a woman sneak out the back of our restaurant after eavesdropping on her horrible date. Their table was right by the service station. He'd spent the entirety of the date complaining about his ex-girlfriend's eating disorder. From the moment they sat down and ordered drinks. Oh wow, you're having wine? That's so refreshing. My ex was anorexic. She had to count calories of everything. And the dude just never stopped. The woman dipped out in between the first and second course. He did a racist impression of his Asian professor while we were having dinner in a Vietnamese restaurant. He picked me up and drove though, so I couldn't leave on the spot. When we got in his car after dinner, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place. I made up an excuse as to why I couldn't. He made 2 calls on Bluetooth to hang out with other people while I was still in the car. It wasn't even while driving back. The car was still in park. All of this happened in about 10 minutes. I got to the bar after him. He had a glass of water on the table and slid it to me after I sat down. I said it's okay, he could have it, and I would wait to get my own. He scoffed and told me I don't know anything about being roofied, and I do. At 3 minutes in, he asked me if he could add me on Facebook so that he could touch himself to my photos. He told me I should stop going to the gym because he could barely get me as is, and if I lost weight, I'd be too hot and he'd have no chance. He then tried to get me to go back to his place, and I declined. He offered to let me sleep on his couch to make the idea more appealing. He then bragged about how much money he had, asked me how short I was on rent, saying he'd give me the money right now. I was not short on rent, and never said I was. Told me he could afford an UberX, but would buy me an Uber pool home because he didn't know me that well. Lastly, he asked me not to BS him and be honest. Would I go on a second date with him? I said no. He stood up and screamed at me in the bar about how I'm the most shallow person he'd ever met, and that the only possible reason I would say no is because he's not good looking enough for me. He stared at my chest the entire time and told me he was in love with me. We had known each other 3 days. What made you straight up nope out of a relationship? How about things that should have been red flags, but I was too naive to recognize? Left notes on my car windshield when I was at work or a friend's house or the store. It seemed sweet, but I realized later that was my significant other keeping tabs on me, even when I didn't say where I was. Would let me know how much a hitman cost and that it was cheaper than you'd expect. Would tell me something and then later say that it was a lie or a test, as though I should have figured that out instead of expecting the truth. Expected me to answer every call, and would get angry if I wanted to end the call first. And lastly, complained about my friends and family all the time. All of them. Apparently, everyone I knew was manipulative and or rude. I didn't figure out this was an attempt to isolate me until after we broke up. He had already shown very jealous tendencies and had smacked me over the head because he thought I was looking at a guy, so it wasn't good already. We were outside of his friend's house and his friend asked how I was doing, and he got mad at me for answering. I just got in my car and drove away. I kept having to call the cops to calm down my wife after she became addicted to a slew of prescription drugs. I told her doctors that opiates for a ruptured vertebra, stimulants for ADHD, Ambien for most nights to help her sleep, and an assortment of others for anxiety and depression, and more to combat side effects, made her violent. One of the times that I called the cops to calm the situation down during a bad episode just made me cry. All he had to say was that he had already been there and asked when it would stop. I thought I'd been holding things together reasonably well. I had an office job where no one knew what was up, though my work had suffered greatly. I kept clothes and food in my trunk, just in case I had to stay out for a bit because she decided I was part of the conspiracy. I had a gym on the way to work where I could shower or just have some downtime. I did all of our housework and errands because she couldn't work or do much of anything most of the time. Each time she cut herself, she told the hospital it was an accident, and she always tried to go to a different one. We lived in a major metro between hospitals. The cop saw through it. Being seen like that and knowing that even that lifestyle was running out hurt. I'm now recovering from the divorce and enjoying the calm. I still sometimes panic for no reason, and I feel more comfortable with clothes and food stashed in the trunk, but I feel much healthier. I get more sleep, my blood pressure is normalized for the most part, and I don't cry at work anymore. I received a message that clearly wasn't meant for me. We had just had our first date, which went really well, calling me cheap and a slimeball and how I'm on my last chance to make things right on her coming birthday with lots of presents. I replied, "Hi, this is X. We just met and had one date. Was that message for someone else?" She replied pretending to be her 12-year-old sister. Then apparently her dad messaged me with how he's told off his younger daughter. I'm out. Screw that. Showing up at my door when I hadn't disclosed my address. For clarification, I'm a guy and we'd only just started dating. I'm very aware of giving out my address until I know who I'm dealing with. I don't want to end up with a stalker if things go sour. It happened anyway in this case. After maybe 2 years of him constantly trying to make me jealous, we temporarily had a 16-hour time difference as I was traveling home to see my grandparents. When I was asleep for maybe 7 hours because, well, it was nighttime and hadn't responded to his 50 texts, he finally said that he was going to spend some time with other girls for 7 hours that day because that's how long I was probably going around spreading my legs. I don't know why, but at that moment, it was like a moment of clarity, and I just replied okay, blocked him, his family, and all his friends, and just moved on. He followed me on a night out and got on his knees stopping traffic in the middle of a city center street to declare his love. We'd been on 2 dates. He also told me that same night he could see into the future and already knew he was going to die defending my honor while I was carrying our twins. Yeah, he was fun. She told me she was on birth control. Turns out she thought drinking a lot of Mountain Dew would make it so she couldn't get pregnant. We were married for 6 years. I started out thinking she was just struggling with depression and anxiety sometimes, but things kept escalating. I walked away when she started threatening to stab me in my sleep. We had already tried several couples therapists and individual therapists, but she refused to consider medication. I called her to meet up and try to find some closure, but she cut me off telling me I wasn't allowed to leave her and as punishment, she was sleeping with 2 other guys. At that point, I just ignored her number and filed for divorce. I hope she's doing well, but I'm glad to not be afraid for my life anymore. We weren't in a relationship per se, but I had a developing thing with a guy once. Until one day when I wasn't around, he and some other friends of ours went to a bar, and he sneakily slipped stronger alcohol into some other girl's drink there. This girl was apparently talking a lot with one of our other friends and not showing much attention to him. So he grew jealous and threw this friend on the floor and started to strangle him. He was obviously thrown out of the bar after that, and later tried to play it off as just a joke and just messing around. How do you jokingly try to strangle someone? Anyway, I dropped this guy out of my life right after I found out. I definitely wouldn't want to be stuck with someone like that. My most recent ex would always ask me random questions, like, what would you do if someone came running towards us right now? Bearing in mind that's pretty vague, I'd answer something like, move out of the way so they can keep running. And she'd say, wrong answer. Then get mad at me because she meant to attack us, and I didn't say I'd jump in the way to defend her. And she used to ask all sorts of very different vague questions, and when I'd answer, she'd say, wrong answer, and get mad at me for not answering the way she wanted me to. Got out of there as quickly as I could. She picked me because I had the same first name, general appearance, and lived in the same area of the state as her ex-fiancé of 2 years. That she had just been dumped by a month before we met. I felt even more offended about all of that than just being straight up rejected. I'm a black person. My bestest buddy in the whole world is a white person. We were roomies at one point. He brought a date over. I met her. Nothing weird. But as it turned out, she had a problem with my bromeo living with a black person, being me. He immediately broke it off with her. I don't have many friends, but I'd like to think I have quality over quantity. I had a huge crush on her for a while, but never had the opportunity to talk to her given our weird work schedules. Then a friend from work sets us up, and I was elated. First date goes really well, and we hit it off. We start spending as much time as we can around each other, talking on the phone every night, all the special things you do when you're starting a new relationship. Then she starts coming over more often unannounced. She would stay for a couple of nights, then a week, then 2 weeks. I would come home from work and she would be in my house, sometimes drunk. The thing was, she had almost been fired for an incident involving alcohol before and was lying to them about her sobriety. She would have a few too many, then go off about her family or how I wasn't taking our 2-month relationship serious enough. The final straw dropped on Valentine's Day this year. She gets annihilated to the point of not being able to walk on her own. After I refuse her drunk advances, she flips out. What followed was a couple hours of her threatening to drive home drunk, sitting outside so the cold weather would freeze her to death, laying in my bed and wailing my name until her voice was hoarse, and alternating between maniac laughter and crying. 2 days later, once she was sobered up, I told her to kick rocks. We had dated for just around 3 months. Quickest turnaround ever for me in a relationship. This happened on the second date. For context, we'd known each other since we were kids, flirted a lot over the years as casual friends, not close friends, just acquaintances, then decided to try dating in our 20s. Him: do you want to get married someday? Me: maybe, I don't know. I'm not even sure if marriage is right for me. I kinda just want to travel and build a career and stuff. That's all I'm thinking about right now. Him: what about in 5 years' time? Me: I don't know, maybe. I mean, if it's the right man, maybe. Him: I've loved you ever since we were kids. Me: thanks. Him: if we were together 5 years from now, would you marry me? Me: I'm not really sure. Spoiler alert, at this point, I'm desperate to run away. Him: I'd hit a girl if she didn't marry me after 5 years, like straight up beat her. Yeah. Bye-bye to the friendship too. She talked a lot about hating guys being cheap on dates. First date, I take her to a really good sushi place and spend like $120 cause I wanted to be nice. She said she would pay for us next time cause she was extremely flattered. For the second date, she chose the place, and she took me to McDonald's. For context, she isn't broke, even gets triple what I make. Like, I don't really care where you take me, but come on, man. Why set the bar so high only to immediately ignore it when you have to be even? She told everybody she knew about any little disagreement. Anytime I could be perceived as unreasonable, it was everybody's business. But somehow the surprises, special dates, lending her cousin rent money, all of that was never brought up. Just the negative stuff was public knowledge. Genuinely feared for my safety. I went over and we got in an argument, so I slept on the floor essentially. I went to the bathroom to text one of my buddies to come pick me up, since I thought she'd fallen asleep. I suddenly get a text from her saying, "Where are you?" And my phone made a sound. I froze up and opened the bathroom door, and she was already standing there waiting for me in the darkness. She didn't say a word at all, just stared at me until I walked by. I went back to my spot on the floor and got under the blanket and pretended to be going asleep until she did. After about 30 minutes, I decided to peek out from under the covers, and she was literally towering over me in the darkness with her eyes wide open the entire time. I got out of there so fast. He didn't have a car, so I'd help him with rides to work. He worked third shift at Toys R Us stocking shelves. I picked him up one night, and he was so drunk he could barely stand. I made some comment about how he isn't going to be able to work. He started throwing things at me in the parking lot. I threw his stuff on the ground and left him there. I've dealt with too many alcoholics, and I wasn't wasting any more of my time. Cut to 5 years later, he's sober now and getting married this year, so good for him. My brother came to visit me. After I spent the whole day with my girlfriend, it was time to see my brother because we didn't see each other for a long time. We prepared some snacks and were about to start Lord of the Rings because both of us love Lord of the Rings. She called me and started a long conversation on the phone. I told her my brother was waiting for me, and she said that I can't spend my time with anyone because it belongs to her. It was the last talk between the two of us. We had dinner plans. She didn't show up and didn't pick up her phone all evening. Then she turned up at around midnight in her car hammered. I tried to take her keys and she ran out of the house. I followed. She then drove her car at me. I called her brother to come pick her up. The next morning, I dropped her car and her belongings at her place and said goodbye. We went to the mall and stopped by this little kiosk selling cookies. I decided that I would get one cookie. The lady working there said if I buy two, I get one free. I decided to buy two and get the third one free. My date went off on this lady saying she's trying to scam me, etc., etc. He was legit yelling so loud that it was echoing through the mall. It was so embarrassing. If you're rude to people in customer service, you're not for me. When my now ex-wife came to the living room where I was sleeping on the couch after a fight and started lunging at me, she asked me if she reminded me of my stepdad who used to come in my room at night and stand over me before he dragged me out of bed by my ankles. He would then put the boots to me for whatever sins I had committed that day. She was the only person I had ever shared this with. She went out of town for work 2 days later, and when she came home, I was gone and in another state. It was remarkable the amount of abuse I put up with to that point. It dawned on me then that if he had returned to my life, I wouldn't let him hurt me. So there was no reason to let her abuse me either. I dated this girl who was jealous, and I mean super jealous. I couldn't hang out with any of my friends without her constantly calling me. Obviously, I couldn't do the same because how could I be jealous? That would have meant I didn't trust her. That's annoying enough to end a relationship, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. After 9 months, I found out from one of my friends, who also happened to be a close friend of hers, that she'd been hiding her sexuality to me. She was actually bi. At first, I didn't really get why she did that, because I absolutely have no problem with these things. A mutual friend then told me she was going around messing around with other chicks. So basically she was hiding her bisexuality so that she could have sex with any girl she wanted to without me even suspecting anything. Sometimes she even had threesomes with the girls' boyfriends. When I told her I knew everything, she started telling me that she didn't want me to know because those people didn't really matter for her and she didn't love them. Needless to say, I noped out of there. It was already on the rocks from roughly around the time the millionth drunken argument happened. However, the moment that sealed it was when she said something to me along the lines of, "If your dad wanted to be alive, he would still be here." My dad died in a car accident 3 years before that. Immediately went from loving her enough to make it work to thinking that she was the most vile person on earth. My brother took a girl to a high-end sushi place, and his date ordered 3 times the food he did. He just got a grilled salmon. She ate almost none of it, and at the end, she said she ordered all the extras so she could take some home for tomorrow. When the waiter showed up for the bill, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. The waiter asked my brother if he wanted to split the check, and at that point, my brother did the right thing and stuck her with $100 worth of sushi and booze. The girl returned to see a huge check at her seat. After our first date, she sent me a Google Maps pin of my address with just "ha ha" as the only context. I hadn't told her my address. She then followed it up with asking how my boss was by using his first name. I hadn't mentioned the name of anyone I worked with. That level of stalker made me pull the eject handle real quick. It started with me telling her that it must have been great to grow up with parents from different cultures. On the second date, after her talking uninterrupted about her family's background for 45 minutes. No irony from me or anything, just a straight up positive and genuine comment. This was followed by 30 minutes of full emotional breakdown in a packed bar and loud comments about my perception of race, which was then followed by intense stare downs from every patron in the bar, which was then followed by the waiter swooping in with shots for her, asking to pay her bill, and asking me if I needed to leave. I felt bad about triggering some sort of trauma, but yeah. I was publicly accused of racism on the second date. Always wondered what the third date had in store, but didn't stick around to find out. She showed up late at my place one night because she couldn't sleep at her place alone. I was fine with that until she started talking about the reason why. When she was alone, the demons in the corners and edges of the room would fill the dark spots and watch with their glowing eyes. I urged her continuously to get help, to go to the doctor, but she wouldn't do it. What she was seeing was real. I felt terrible leaving her for that, but I wasn't equipped to deal with someone who needed professional help and refused it. She came to stay for the first time. It was the night before New Year's Eve and we were planning to go out drinking for New Year's Eve. I had just worked a 12-hour shift. I was a carpet fitter, so manual labor, and I was exhausted. She had a few drinks and started to get aggressive, because I just wanted to relax that night, but she wanted to go out drinking. We broke up 3 days later. My father was an aggressive drunk when I was a kid, so I could see how it would go. If you know you're an aggressive drunk, get off the drink, man. I was interested in this woman I worked with many years ago, and the feeling was mutual. We had gone bowling a couple of times and we had started talking about potentially dating. She said, if we date, I expect to be taken out at least twice a week, given gifts at least once a week, and we won't have sex for at least 3 months. Considering we had almost the same work schedule, I have no idea how she thought I was going to pull any of that off. Her father recently got into a brawl with a date's teenage kid. I was concerned and asked questions. She then explained how the teen had it coming because they didn't know their place. Feeling confused, I asked her to elaborate again. It turned out that a grown man punched a mentally disabled autistic teen rather than simply walk away. I told her that I refuse to date people who are cool with domestic violence. She was immediately remorseful, but then defended her father's drunken violent outburst against a child a few moments later. Don't date people who think that an adult ought to beat mentally disabled children. Not even a relationship, but got very close. Met a guy through a local theater, and I thought he was cool. But then he started following me around everywhere when I was at practice and shows. The last straw was when I didn't get notified that a practice had been canceled, and he was waiting there, saying, "I just felt like someone would show up." And it absolutely raised my alarm bells. Worst part is, when I tried to get help from the director or other actors, they'd ignore me or try to tell me that he's just trying to be nice and he can't help it. I blocked and deleted his number, and I'm sad to say I haven't gone back to public theater since, as he's still actively involved in most plays in town. I was going through some stuff in my early 20s and was pretty desperate for any kind of affection, which is the only reason I took a couple weeks to back out of this. The second time I ever met her, she told me to delete every girl's number from my phone, sister included. She then came over to my place, saw I had a bookshelf, and ridiculed me for being a reader, and in the same breath announced that she loved cocaine so much and wanted me to try it. Finally, I escaped, but by then she was already sleeping with 2 of my friends, who are obviously no longer my friends. The good news is, I've now been happily married for 5 years and consider myself so incredibly lucky. When I wasn't allowed to hang out with my male friends in broad daylight, but he thought it was okay to hang out with girls he didn't know in the middle of the night, that was a major red flag. I was dating a really cool guy and everything was going great. And then about a month in, he started talking baby talk to me, and it did not stop. We had been together for quite a while, 6 to 8 months, and lived together for at least 2 months when I decided to make a tuna salad. I asked how he liked it. He told me. I came back with 2 bowls. Half the can made his way, and half the can made the way I liked it. He completely freaked out. He said, "If we can't agree on how to eat tuna, how will this ever work?" I said that we don't have to agree. We can both have it exactly the way we want and be happy. He strongly disagreed. I started thinking of all of his other controlling behavior and inability to compromise. It wasn't that day that we broke up, but it was definitely the day our relationship broke. The cheating didn't help either. Waiters of Reddit, what's the most messed up conversation you've overheard while waiting tables? I was bringing a check for a wealthy local businessman who was dining with his girlfriend. It was a big tab and I was already counting the tip when the woman hurled his drink in his face and yelled to an aghast room of people, "You didn't even pay for the abortion!" and stormed out. The man calmly brushed the ice off of his suit and looked around and said, "Not the first time, won't be the last." I wheeled off and gave him the bill later. I had a couple that came in with their kid. It's slow and we have time to take it slow, so I'm just relaxing there when I see the couple getting into an argument. It's clear from the facial expressions that they're getting into a heated argument. Just as I'm about to come over with the bill, before it got even worse, She throws her drink at his face, throws the food on the ground, and leaves with the kid. He's stranded at the restaurant since she took the car and awkwardly stays here for about an hour. We tried to make him comfortable, but it was incredibly awkward. After he left, the police came to our restaurant about 3 hours later asking if he ate here. Turns out he died that night in a hit and run. St. Patrick's Day, working at a pretty busy bar in San Diego. Waiting on a table of fraternity guys from SDSU. No big deal. I take the order and notice something is seriously off with one of the guys. Not like he was hammered or anything, but he was just making a weird face. The bar was crowded and noisy, so his bros didn't notice it. But I walked up by him and was like, "Are you okay?" He looked at me, pale as a ghost, and said, "I just pooped my pants. It's everywhere. It's in my shoes." Now, as a man who's been there, I felt I had to help out. I also worked security at this place, so grabbed the attention of one of the big Tongan bouncers. Took the bouncer aside, and if you don't know this, Tongans are some of the most helpful people around, and told him the deal as I'm starting to smell and see poop. The next thing I know, the 3 big Tongan doormen come out of nowhere and muscle this guy out, just saying the usual, "Sorry guys, but your friend has to go." They took him in the back and already had a clean pair of boxers and jeans for the guy, and let him clean up in the staff bathroom, and one of them actually gave him a ride home. I was busy and didn't see him leave, but got a cool note from their fraternity the next day and an honorary sweatshirt and a gift certificate to Best Buy. I still have it somewhere. He got to save face with the girls they were with, and they were all regulars after that, and tipped really well. There was this group of 4 elderly women who would come into my family's restaurant once a month. One month, one of them came by herself. I asked, "Hi Edith, where are all your friends?" "They all died." And she broke into tears. I felt like crap the rest of the night. I worked at a high-end bistro during summers in college, and the rule was even if we were closing at 11 and someone came in at 10:59, we served them. So this older, attractive white man in his 60s came in with a small but built Asian guy in his 20s. They sat across each other at a two-top and just ordered wine and dessert. This was pretty typical, and as they were my last table, I could leave after I had bussed their table and tipped out. So I started packing up the silverware and menus at the tables in my section and doing my other closing duties. I was walking by their table and heard they were having a heated yet quiet argument, as if they didn't want to make a scene. I heard snippets of, "No, $600 and you spend the night," by the older male, and "No, $800, blowjob, 1 round of butt stuff, and I leave when I'm done." And I was mentally like, okay, and left them to negotiate alone. Yeah, I would probably do the same thing. Just let them sort out their business. I mean, it's not as if you can chime in on a conversation like that, right? I was a Waffle House waitress for 4 years in high school. I saw and heard quite a bit. I honestly got used to old truckers asking me if I wanted to make an extra tip in the parking lot at the grand old age of 16. But the one time I literally had to say WTF, I didn't even understand the conversation. 2 Latino couples were sharing a booth and seemed to be having a good time. I don't speak Spanish, but nothing in their tone made it seem unusual. Out of nowhere, one of the husbands grabs his wife by the back of her hair, slams her face into the table, and just goes about his conversation. He didn't even look at her. She wiped her face off and just went back to talking and listening. No one batted an eye at the table. I delivered their food a few minutes later, and all 4 of them seemed like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I've called out dozens of customers in my day. You can say pretty much whatever you want as a Waffle House waitress since it's not exactly a classy joint, but I had no idea how to respond to that scenario. I once waited on a couple that broke up while I was waiting on them. They came separately. The wife showed up first. She was very chipper and friendly, and I grabbed her a water while she was waiting on her husband. The husband showed up around 10 minutes later. When I went to the table to grab his drink, I could hear her saying, "What's wrong? What's your deal? Just talk to me." While I was waiting at the bar for his drink, one of the hosts ran up to me and said, "Hey, I think your table's breaking up." I look up to the corner where they're sitting and the wife is sobbing. Now what do? I have to bring him his drink, even though surely they aren't going to stay and eat now, right? Wrong. I brought him his drink, and when I set it down in front of him, expecting him to tell me thanks but no thanks, we're leaving, he says, "Do you know what you want?" Through her tears, she says, "Yes," and orders. What the heck? I have to wait on these people now. I then have one of the most awkward tables of my life, having to keep up my peppy attitude and fake smiles while this poor woman's life is crashing down. When it was all over and I set the bill down in front of the husband, I figured he would at least be kind enough to pay the bill. Alas, he pushed it back to me and said, "Can you separate this, please?" This guy's so brutal, I'm surprised he didn't slide you divorce papers to sign as a witness as well. Not really messed up, but just a complete lack of understanding from a privileged person. I worked at a popular restaurant chain while I was in college. This was about 7 years ago. The owners of one of the largest beer breweries in the country came in to eat. They're sitting there eating and the wife says to the husband, "I don't understand what you mean by living paycheck to paycheck." He explains to her what living paycheck to paycheck actually means in a very respectful and unbiased fashion. She still doesn't get it. She questions why these people don't have any money left over after they pay their bills and why they don't just change that, or why their bills are so high, or why they don't just make more money. They were out to eat with another couple who also tried explaining this to her. A solid 10 minutes were spent on trying to educate this woman on the fact that most people don't live like she's used to. All of them sort of gave up trying when they realized she just didn't get it. You could literally see the confusion on her face. It gave me a new perspective on things. It was the last table of my last shift of my last day at this place. Two top, man and a woman. Both pretty attractive and looking extremely happy to be out on a date together. The meal goes smoothly. They ask for the check. I bring it. Upon returning to grab their credit card, I ask if they'd like me to box up their leftovers. He says sure, and just as I'm leaning in to grab her plate of pasta, she looks him dead in the eye while holding his hand and says, "I'm pregnant." I freeze a bit, then silently carry their plates back to the kitchen. I was so shocked that I was on autopilot mode and accidentally threw their leftovers away. The guy was not very hungry after that anyway. Too bad you threw it away. She's eating for two now, you know. I waited tables and bartended in the late 80s after college. Two ladies sat down at a table in my section. I greeted them and got them water. A man showed up and instantly turned pale. Turns out it was his wife and his girlfriend, and they had found out about each other and set him up. He had his head in his hands the whole time. I didn't hear a lot of what they were saying, but the pieces I did hear were unpleasant. Two guys sitting at my bar top, looking super shady, decided they were going to scout out for ladies. Now, if you've worked in a continuously loud environment, you know that people will say anything when they think you can't hear them. Man, that was stupid. "What about the blonde with the blue dress?" "Nah, I was thinking of that one." He pointed to a smaller one, more fragile looking brunette, sitting by herself. They get quiet for a bit before the first guy asks, "Are you sure you want to do this?" The second guy, "That's what she gets for dressing like that. Let's hope she's parked in the back." I said screw that and called the police. They were asked to leave and one of the officers offered to follow the girl home. Kudos to our original poster on this one because he prevented what could have been a very dangerous situation for this girl. I waited tables at the Olive Garden 10 years ago. Not really messed up as much as it was funny. A guy and his wife sat down at a table and immediately started arguing. Something about his affair and how a baby from it was costing them money. Finally, it culminated as I was bringing out their salad, and as I walked away, I heard the wife say, "Maybe if you hadn't boned our son's girlfriend and gotten her pregnant, we could afford to eat somewhere nicer than Olive Garden. Oh look, the highlight of my meals, unlimited bagged salad. Maybe you could save up and we could go to Joe's Crab Shack for our anniversary." I hate to say it, but maybe this relationship should just come to an end at this point. That sounds like a messed up situation. A waitress at our restaurant, a wealthy but crazy 45-year-old divorcee, was written up 4 times for saying obscene things to guests. The last straw, she gave a plate of food to a man at the bar with a huge mustache and said, "Nice mustache, I'd like to sit on your face," and carried on back to the kitchen as if she'd said nothing at all. You hear a lot of things and I try not to judge, but the two that just stick out in my mind the most are number 1, the first time, please note that's the first, a mother handed me her child's bottle and asked me to fill it with Coke. And number 2 was a table of 3. A mom and her 2 kids, maybe about 7 and 5. She's ignoring me on her phone, not paying attention to anything. The kids are super polite, and I ask what they'd like to drink. And the little girl says, "Can we have some water, please, in the fun cups?" And the mother puts her phone down, snaps at that child, and I swear almost grabs her and says, "No, you'll have a Diet Coke. Get them a Diet Coke." "But Mom, we're thirsty." "Shut it." Kids just wanted some water. I don't understand people. I really don't understand why it had to be Diet Coke over water. Is there some secret added benefit to Diet Coke that I don't know about? People often don't realize that when you're sitting at the bar, the bartenders hear everything. Sometimes I talk with the guests, but sometimes people have really intense and private conversations like less than a meter away from me. I'll just keep my head down and rinse glasses and pour drinks and basically pretend I'm really busy. Just yesterday, there were two guys in their early 20s talking about how their girlfriends were total pains who nagged and complained all the time. They drank a lot of tequila and whiskey, and at one point, one guy said to the other, "You should just sleep in my place, you can't drive like this." The other disagreed, and they got into a drunken argument, and at one point, the guy who suggested the sleepover grabbed the other guy's face and said, "F you," and then they just started making out, just out of the blue. Sloppy and drunk making out. It was weird and hilarious. This is my boss's story from when she used to work at a fast food joint. The cashier was a girl who had a short pixie haircut. There was a group of Jehovah's Witnesses that came in and insisted to my manager that they get a different cashier because they don't want any lesbians serving them. The girl was recovering from cancer and has been regrowing her hair. They were immediately kicked out. It was one of the rudest things I've ever heard. I was working as a hostess at a local chain restaurant. The host stand is right next to the bar. There was an older couple, probably in their 70s, eating and having a drink at the bar. They start to walk out with their arms around each other and giggling. Then the woman accidentally drops their box of leftovers. She starts cracking up and says, "I just tossed you a salad." And still with arms around each other, laughing hysterically, they walk out. Made my week. Had to throw in at least one nice story for you guys. Former waitress here. I used to work at a sports bar grill type place that did a pretty good weekday lunch business. One day, I was waiting on a group of guys at a round table having a work lunch. They were discussing business and sharing spreadsheets and things like that. At one point, I was walking up to the table to check on them, and the guy with his back towards me was fiddling with his BlackBerry. And as I get closer, I can see he's watching adult material. Keep in mind, this was long enough ago that internet on phones wasn't nearly as common as it is now, so it was kind of crazy. Dudes carrying on a conversation about financial strategies while watching adult content in the middle of a restaurant. I just got their refills and made sure to approach the table from a different angle when I came back. When I was in the front retail section of a certain country-style chain restaurant, I saw a very young boy studying the toys and gifts while his mother was talking to the hostess. At the time, we had a toy squid with a little propeller that was lazily drifting around the little display tank. Once he saw it, his eyes went wide and he yelled in shock, "That looks just like Mommy's toy!" All of the color drained from her face as she ran over, grabbed his wrist, and fled the restaurant, never to be seen again. Way to be subtle, kid. Jeez. I'm German, but live in an Asian country, so it's not very common to meet other people who are German. I was waitressing as a summer job, and one night I was serving this old man who was there with a group of friends. As soon as he sat down, he told his friends in German, "I wouldn't pay $10 to sleep with that slave," talking about one of my Filipino coworkers. I proceeded to continue serving the table the entire night, and the old guy kept on saying more messed up racist stuff about my other Filipino coworkers. When he asked for the bill, I let my coworkers know about the terrible stuff that guy had been saying. The manager, who was also Filipino, confronted him about it, but the old man denied all the allegations. It ended with the racist jerk paying and walking out of the restaurant, stammering to his friend, "How did he know what we were talking about?" I chose that moment to say to them in German with a huge grin, "Good night and thank you for dining with us." Needless to say, the expression on his face was priceless. Sometimes people say really horrible things about other people for no good reason just because they think others can't understand them. It's quite sickening, really. I waited on a table with two young couples on a date. As I approached to clear their table, I overheard them talking about sex. They immediately went quiet once they saw me approach while smirking not too subtly to each other. I asked them if it was good, and they said they enjoyed it greatly. Upon which I asked, "And how was the food?" They erupted in laughter, and I got a very generous tip. Good times. I work as a bartender once a week. Just last night, an attractive couple came in. They honestly already looked halfway smashed. For a while, I thought I heard a faint buzzing noise, but didn't think much of it. As I come up behind them to serve them food, the lady embraced her man and said, "Oh God, turn this thing off before I lose my mind." I understand public displays of affection, but this is just incredibly awkward for anyone else around you. Please don't do this. I used to work at a family burger joint that was part of a large chain. We saw a lot of birthday parties and stressed out parents. This one afternoon, a smallish group came in to celebrate a toddler's birthday. There were 2 couples and 5 kids under the age of 5. Now, anyone getting this table would think, oh no. You're looking at a bunch of kids' meals, which means getting a bunch of drinks and refills for barely any cost and therefore barely any tip. But I figure I'll make this a fun party for them, and maybe they'll leave a nice tip out of gratitude. Yeah, right. The moment I get to this table, one of the women thrusts a bottle at me saying it's breast milk which she wants me to heat up with hot water. I smile and say no problem. Hungry babies are crying babies, and it's not like I'd be grossed out by breast milk, especially when it's in a bottle. I'm sure she wants the milk quickly, so I hand the job off to my supervisor while I get the other 9 drinks for the table. When I get back to my section with the drink tray, the lady stands up and yells at me, "If you have a problem with someone, why don't you say it to their face?" It took me a moment to realize that she thought I'd handed the milk to my supervisor because I was grossed out by it. "Oh, no," I said. "There's no problem, ma'am. I just knew I'd be a minute with these other drinks and I figured you'd get the milk sooner, so..." "I don't want to hear it. This is terrible customer service and I'm disgusted." Turning to her friends, she told them, still yelling, "I can't even be here anymore. I'm sorry, but this party is ruined. I'm leaving." And she marched out, dragging her now crying children and leaving both my shift leader and I standing agape in the middle of the section. The worst part was, her friends had to try and finish their poor child's birthday party after this. The birthday boy was crying, and his parents looked like they might want to join him. And of course, no apologetic tip or words were forthcoming. Yeah, I hate to say it, but a lot of the times you're not going to get a tip in that situation. They're not going to be in a great mood, meaning they're not going to be feeling very generous towards you. So you get to deal with all that for pretty much nothing. Sorry. I generally try not to eavesdrop on my guests, and at busy times I find myself keeping 5 or 6 different objectives prioritized in my brain, so I don't hear a lot. Every so often though, a certain word or turn of phrase will make it through and capture my attention. The most recent of these that comes to mind was a lady I'd guess to be in her mid-20s who, completely straight-faced, told her dining partner, "No, seriously, dead is way better than broken up. At least with dead, I know where he is and what he's up to." That's a little concerning. Maybe you should have called the police. I walked up to the table with a young newly married couple. They seemed to be in conversation, but I was busy so I didn't have time to wait for them to finish. As soon as I walked up, I heard the girl say, "If you ever lie to me again, I swear to God I will poop on your pillow." There was an awkward pause before I said, "Hi, what can I get y'all to drink?" I worked at a fine dining restaurant during college, overlooking the lake, white tablecloths, $300 bottle of wine, the whole bit. One night, the matriarch of a family company that is incredibly wealthy and well-known came in with some of the company's executives. It's my table, but a large one. So one of our male servers, I'm female, was helping me take initial drink orders. The entire group ignores me and speaks only to him. My first clue that maybe this isn't going to go well. But whatever, that's fine. Maybe they're just confused about who the lead server is. I pop out to the bar to start getting their drinks from the bar staff. And while I'm out there, our maitre d' comes up to me, "Your table has requested that male server to be the one to take care of them." Ouch. Okay, there goes the money I'm going to make tonight, but okay. Later, I'm walking past their table with a few dirty dishes in my hands, and I hear the matriarch say, "Now there's her proper place." This was in 2011. About a month ago, I served a couple that was celebrating their 30th anniversary. They were dressed to the nines and looking very happy together. I offered to take a picture of them when I saw them awkwardly attempting a selfie. I shot a few pictures and handed her the phone back. When I went to take his empty plate, I noticed he had kind of a frantic look on his face, but I couldn't gauge the situation. Turns out, the phone was his, not hers. 5 minutes later, she's flipping out about a girl named Candy, who he was apparently texting during their anniversary dinner. Dude obviously didn't care at all. They end up in an all-out brawl, with everyone in the restaurant watching. Needless to say, I got stiffed for the $110 check, and I'm sure he'll always blame me for getting caught. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.